Micro, Karim, micro.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning to open this seminar about a quite original topic, which is a triangular cooperation between the European Union, Africa, and Asia. I would like to thank our partner, the Ghent Universities, and particularly Ivan, our senior fellow here and professor in Madrid as well, for being the force and the dynamic behind this seminar. So thanks to you, Ivan, this is happening, and of course your colleague in the platform at Ghent University trying to work on this issue. I said an original topic because it is a sort of new way of seeing the world, I would say, taking in account the rise of Asia, but also the centrality in a way of the Africa, European Union, Europe axis, which has a long a long history of cooperation, millennia even, which has come up in a more sort of pragmatical and practical cooperation since the rise of the European Union. And I guess it is changing also with the sort of consolidation and reinforcement of the African Union on the African continent. Let us not forget that Africans are quite proud of the African Union. They're investing a lot in the African Union, and you can see the role that the African Union has played during the COVID. Of course, not perfect, etc., but it is in the making. And I think I would say I'll be very brief, but there is a very important message, and to also share with you why we are interested to join you and to cooperate and to think together. It is the notion of the centrality of dialogue and the importance of dialogue, exchange, and values in this world. And I think the EU has proven as a as a model of cooperation in a way, despite all odds and difficulties. And we're very much aware of the tensions within the European Union. But when things become critical, the institution, its members are capable of finding an agreement, a peaceful agreement, and I would say an efficient agreement that is not too costly institutionally, not too costly in terms of the way you solve, you negotiate and you solve sort of problems and different views of the world. And I think COVID and what has been done in terms of mutualizing debt to engineer a recovery program for the European Union is something to be looked at very carefully. And it is something that could be, I would say, of interest within your topic today, which is triangular cooperation. You need instruments. And I think the European Union has been strong at creating instruments. Not always, of course, there's some will say that there are too many instruments, it's too bureaucratic, etc. But there is value in instruments. Instruments are sort of pillars, are sort of, sources of energy around which we can cooperate. And I think I would urge you to think to think a bit practically on this notion of triangular cooperation. Around values, shared values, that is what unites us today here. We believe in fact-based analysis, we believe in empirical analysis, we believe in science, we believe in tolerance. We have values that are, uniting us. We are able to discuss. And it is more important than ever to be able to discuss. Only to discuss and exchange point of views and solve our, differences, but also to discuss to create new avenues for cooperation, new instruments around which we can imagine the future. So my sense in this partnership, of course, the EU and Africa, long-standing partner, our partners, ASEAN and European Union as well. They have their own cooperation and relations, but there are ways we can invent. One is around financial instruments, maybe. One is around maybe some specific sectors and thinking of value chains and how we build value chains within this triangle, how we make sure regulation and rule of law and regulations, in particular economic regulations, facilitate the development of these value chains. This is one example of that. There are, of course, foreign direct investment and the framework around it that could be thought of, and in some of having some pilot experiences rather than having grand project, etc. I believe a lot in experimentation and small steps and pilot projects. So in a nutshell, I would say we will be listening to you, and you can count on the support of the Policy Center. It is something we're interested in. And again, with a practical orientation and useful for policymakers. This is what we do at the think tank, but also think also of the next generation, the youth. How can we connect them? Academia and science, I think it's important. It creates structural and long-term relations. It densifies the exchanges. We need to know each other. This is not a region, for instance, that we have a very good knowledge of in Morocco and in general in Africa, talking about the ASEAN. So I would say densifying and intensifying exchanges and creating multiple sort of gradients of cooperation is of matter. It's important. It's not that expensive. Academic university faculty exchanges for students as well. I think it works. It works well at the University Mohammed VI Polytechnic. We have a couple of partnerships with universities from the side of the world. Of course, with the European Union, we have many, and they are been here for quite a long time. But we are also venturing in this region, and it's lots of interest from students, from faculties as well, to do work together. So again, thank you to all of you. And wish you a great seminar. It's been a pleasure, and you can count on our support and involvement. Thank you again.
Peter?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me. I am Peter Bossier from Ghent University, and I'm the chair of what we call the ASEANplus Platform at our university. So very briefly, because I'm not into your topic of today, but I just want to address and explain you very briefly the involvement of Ghent University in the initiative of today. So the university is very honored to be able to facilitate this meeting. And why is that? Is that because we are very strongly engaging in internationalization as a university, and we have set ourselves quite a lot of objectives. And one of them, for instance, is that 25% of our students should have an international experience during their educational trajectory. So that's quite a very strong commitment. For instance, as it stands, we have about 1,800 students yearly who go abroad, and we receive every year 6,000 students from abroad. So that's quite a lot of movement of students going in and out, and also that facilitates internationalization at our university. Another thing that we have done is that we have created at our university platforms, and so to facilitate that internationalization. So the ASEANplus platform is one of them, but we have also an Africa platform, we have a China platform, we have a Russia platform, and a SESAM platform. The SESAM is basically the Latin America countries. So there are lots of ways in which we can illustrate that Ghent University is very much interested in internationalization. For instance, we have been acquiring and coordinating a European network project, which is called Enlight, which was just approved something like 1 month ago. And that will facilitate the collaboration between 9 European universities. And also in that program, internationalization is a very important point. So we are very happy that our colleague Erwan, together with this team of the Policy Center for the New South and all the members here around the table today, have joined forces, and that I'm sure that will encourage creative thinking about this triangle partnership that has been already presented to you today. And from our part, from the ASEANplus Platform at Ghent University, we are very willing to try to facilitate any other initiatives in the future. I will not be able to join for the rest of the day completely. I will start listening the first half an hour, but then Jean Dont, who is coordinator of the ASEANplus Platform, will join you for the rest of the day. Thank you very much for this occasion.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Bonjour à tous. Je suis Erwan Lannon, donc professeur à l'université de Gand et également membre de la plateforme ASEANplus qui vient d'être mentionnée. Je vais m'exprimer en anglais, mais il y a une traduction, je crois, qui est disponible. First of all, I would like to express my sincerest thanks for the e-hospitality of the Policy Center for the New South. Morocco is very renowned for its hospitality, but now we have even electronic hospitality, which is very impressive. Many thanks to all participants and also my colleagues from the Ghent ASEANplus Platform to contribute directly and being involved in this project. It's really a pleasure to be with you because together with Ivan, we started to think about the project in August, and we see that already now we have this conference online. So thank you so much for all your effort. I know that it was difficult in the current context. And I think that it's really time to engage in the reflection. The more we work on it since August, the more we see that it's not only appropriate, but it's a very good timing that we have to have this reflection among the 3 continents on the consequences of the pandemic. And also because it highlighted the effect on globalization and the deficiencies also at the level of the EU, for instance, and the lack of geopolitical projection that we had in the past. So this is also one of the opportunities because this geopolitical European Commission is starting to work. So we are following this very closely. It's an opportunity to engage in a broad dialogue, as it was mentioned, with academic think tanks, but also decision shapers, makers. It's a very progressive approach that we took. We do not forget the transatlantic dimension or Latin America, but we decided really to concentrate on Europe, Africa, and Asia. Why? Because of the calendar, notably, because the next weeks and months will be absolutely key for redesigning EU-Africa relationships, but also the new elements regarding the strategy of EU vis-a-vis Asia, China, and the ASEAN are also being reassessed for the time being. There is also the multi-annual financial framework. What about the post-Cotonou? And there is, of course, this area of free trade areas that needs to be taken into consideration. And in this regard, you've noticed, and this is why I think we have a very good timing, that we had a signature of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, so an FTA linking the 10 countries of the ASEAN and the 5 Asia-Pacific countries, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, just a few days ago. And the High Representative Vice President, Josep Borrell, reacted immediately on his blog a few days ago, and I would like to quote him, open quotes, "I'm determined to expand our cooperation with ASEAN and develop our own view on how the EU should engage in the broader Indo-Pacific region. As elsewhere, the key question is what will be the nature of this regional order. And the president already tackled that issue of the chain of values, for instance. So this is a kind of echo that we have here. He also added, open quotes, the emergence of this gigantic Asian free trade zone should be decisive incentive to Africa and Latin America to accelerate their plans of regional integration, an important element that was already mentioned. So our main research questions are the following. And again, there are more emerging. But the first one is which main geopolitical, geoeconomic, and legal constraints and which new dynamics between Europe, Africa, and Asia can we expect in the next decade? The second one is what is the potential for developing new synergies and partnership triangulations and new instruments that were also referred to across the three continents. Again, there are many other questions emerging, but this is a bit to structure the discussion. Now I will pass the floor to Yvan Martin, who is going to answer the two questions in 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, everybody. Of course, I fully join the gratitude expressed by you to the Policy Center first and to the Ghent University and in particular the ASEANplus Platform. As Karim has mentioned at the very beginning, this is somehow an original approach because it is thinking out of the box of the current status of partnerships between the EU and third partners. But if you look at the global strategic compass, which is these days being produced by the European Union, you see that one of the four baskets or axes of it is global partnerships. The other three, by the way, are crisis management, resilience, and capacity. And we thought that it is time, on the one hand, to make a collective sense of the whole array of partnerships undertaken by the European Union, and on the other hand, to contribute to the discussion of how these different partnership instruments articulate with each other and may bring into a collective narrative the different relations of the European Union with Asia, Africa, and other strategic partners. Today is by coincidence, actually, the 25th anniversary of the Barcelona conference starting the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership, the 27th of November 1995. And I mentioned that because actually I think it is somehow revealing that we are now today, 25 years afterwards, Erwan and me starting a project with researchers and experts from Africa, from Asia, and from Europe, discussing Europe, Africa, Asia. And this is probably meaning that the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership and the neighborhood policy cannot be encapsulated anymore and isolated from other partnership dynamics between the European Union and Asia, between Africa and Asia, and of course between the European Union and Africa. And this is what we want to explore in this conference and in the set of papers that we expect to produce on the basis of it. Another rationale for the conference and the whole project dynamics is the fact that, as we all say all the time, challenges today, global challenges are common, but they require common solutions. Actually, if you look at the main challenges that we are all mentioning, digitalization, digital agenda, Green Deal and Green Agenda, development and finance of infrastructures in Africa and Asia, all of them almost by nature involve Europe, Asia, and Africa in many cases as well. So it makes sense to think about possibilities of triangular partnerships and triangular dynamics that actually contribute to face those challenges. And this is also another of the endeavors of our conference today, to make a contribution to defining common sectoral strategies to face those common challenges. Yes, to close my intervention so that we can come forward to the substance of the discussions, our objectives in this conference are basically three. First, very modest one, but very ambitious one at the same time, to bring together a group of researchers from Africa, Asia, and Europe to discuss this partnership dynamics and possibilities for triangulation. Second, to set the basis to produce a first set of publications, short papers, in a quick time with crisscrossed perspectives on Europe, Asia, Africa, partnership dynamics, geopolitical context, the challenges posed by China, partnership instruments, as mentioned before by Karim. I will talk about this more in my intervention later, and of course, triangulation opportunities. And the conference is basically a framework to present preliminary outlines of those papers and of those publications and discuss them with some peers. And finally, the structure, the way we have structured the conference is in three panels. First one on geopolitics and contextual issues and triangular dynamics of Europe, Asia, Pacific partnerships. Second one session, one panel on partnership instruments, regional and sectoral strategies and resources. And a third panel on the potential for triangular cooperation and mutual learning between the three continents. So without any further detail, I think that we can go on to the core of our conference today, to panel one. So I give the floor to Bushra Rahmouni, who will be chairing this first panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Good morning, everybody from Morocco time zone. And it's indeed my pleasure today to welcome you all to this high-level international conference on Europe, Africa, Asia, What Partnership After 2020, and to welcome you to the first and very interesting panel on geopolitics and triangular dynamics between Europe, Africa, and Asia. In order to get a better understanding of the thematic, first of all, we will hear from His Excellency, from Her Excellency Len Ismail, a senior fellow at Policy Center for the New South, on the questions related to the presence of the European Union and the USA in Africa, Asia, ACP countries, and the Global South. Indeed, our senior fellow, Len Ismail, has contributed to the quarterly journal by Beyond the Horizon, ISSJ, under the theme, Influencing and Promoting Global Peace and Security Horizon Insights, with a policy paper where she addresses China use of the actual COVID-19 context to deepen and extend its power and influence in Europe and the world. Secondly, we will hear from Professor Bruno Jettin, Director of the Institute of Asian Studies at the University of Brunei Dar es Salaam, concerning the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, if it will increase China's influence in Asia, and what are the implications for European Union, Asia, ASEAN partnership. And we will close the panel with the intervention of Professor Kidan Kiros, Senior Fellow at Policy Center for the New South, and he will discuss the geopolitical importance of the Horn of Africa for the triangular relationship of Europe, Africa, and Asia. So let us begin, and the floor is yours, Len.
Thank you so very much, Butra. It's good to join everybody here. Of course, I'm speaking to you all from Brussels. And I would like to set the stage somewhat by first painting a rather big picture view of the issues before us. And I would break these down by making a number of observations relative perhaps to just three parameters. The first is that I will outline a few facts relative to each geographic region. And secondly, since our subject is about partnerships, and partnerships denote shared interest. I will do a quick scoping of the geopolitical interest of the three regions. And third, given current changes in the balance of world power, I will present one scenario in which possible convergence of interests between the three regions may emerge. Now, some basic facts. The three regions, as we know, are distinct and, of course, they're very, very different. Areas of convergence are not readily apparent. If we take a look at economic structures, we start with the obvious. Europe, especially Western Europe, is a very rich continent. In Asia, 80% of the countries are middle income, and this is the highest percentage in the developing world. And as we know, Africa, of course, trails in comparison. Less than 50% of all countries are middle income countries. And it also has the highest rates of poverty in the world, despite gains. And poverty is still growing in parts of the continent. The structure of the economies are also quite different. Access to capital, labor, the rate of return on labor, integration into value chains are all quite varied. If we take a look at one aspect of the labor market, that of demography, again, stark differences emerge. Europe is aging rapidly. 24 of the 25 fastest aging countries in the world are in Europe. Populations are shrinking. At stake is Europe's future prosperity and quality of life. Some countries in Asia, such as Japan, for example, are also aging. And Japan leads the world with respect to aging. By 2050, almost 40% of its population will be over the age of 65. By that year as well, almost 38% of Europe's population will be over the age of 60. Conversely, by 2015, more than 75% of Africa's population was aged below 35. Today, 60% are under the age of 25, making Africa the youngest population in the world by 2050, with more than 800 million young people. Africa will have the world's largest and youngest labor force. The relationship between the three regions is also complex. Differences in cultures, norms, natural alliances, and histories abound. Many countries in Africa and Asia, for example, are former colonies of European empires, and the power relations, therefore, with Asia and Africa, with Europe, are also quite different. And to illustrate, if we take a quick look at the EU relationship with Africa, though it is changing, up to relatively recently, this was based on asymmetry, and predominantly that between a donor and a recipient. Today, we speak about the need for much more equal partnership. And the core of the relationship, however, is revolving around the migration, development, security nexus. Africa is Europe's closest continental partner, with a jobs deficit in the millions annually, with implications, of course, for unregulated migration. Northern Africa, the relationship with Europe is very different, very much guided by a number of trade relationships, as well as Europe's near neighborhood policies. Asia is further away, of importance for Europe in terms of its markets, infrastructure, commerce, and some more. And in some cases, when we look at Singapore, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan in the Pacific, the relationship is also one of allies in the framework of the Western Liberal Democracy Alliance. The elephant in the room, of course, relations with China. Each region has profoundly different relations with China. Let's quickly move on to interest. Perhaps I think the single biggest challenge revolves around the reconciliation of divergent interest between the three regions. If we take a look at Asia, with the rise of China, the Asia-Pacific theater has become the geographic center of great power competition today. It's a major preoccupation for the entire region. Then we throw the Indo-Pacific theater in the mix, and there again, we throw India, a growing giant, into the mix. Now, India has been very reluctant until relatively recently to embrace the terminology of Indo-Pacific theater. But it now sees this as an important opportunity to rekindle the drive for global prominence. Now, India, as we know, has its own very fractious and volatile relationship with China along a land border. And the Indian Ocean has become a forum in which China is competing for influence while perhaps in that particular theater, India has perhaps been too comfortable and too complacent. In the recent tit-for-tat trade war between and escalating tensions between the US and China, it has not been in India's interest to be caught between the US and China, but it must in fact balance its own interests strategically and very, very carefully. Now, we all know and appreciate that technology is becoming the new frontier for great power competition, and Asia does not want to be squeezed between the United States and China. Indeed, quite recently, the Prime Minister of Singapore said, and I quote, "choosing sides is bad not just for us, it's bad for the entire world." When we take a look at Europe, we see different interests and responsibility. Europe sits at the heart of the transatlantic relationship. That relationship has been fractured over the last 4 years, but we have hope that this will soon change. The view of China by Europe has been previously as a competitor, a partner, and sometimes a threat. More recently, the stance has changed from strategic cooperation to that of a systemic rival. And China's use of the financial crisis of 2008 to invest deep into the heart of Europe has worked to undermine EU policy and coherence as a result of veto actions on the part of some Southern and Eastern European countries. Yet China for the EU remains an important partner on the international agenda involving aspects of global governance. It's a huge investor and certainly a partner of very, very important commercial significance. Whilst the new EU leadership spoke about the creation of a geopolitical commission, we see little political appetite to assume a wider geopolitical role on the world stage. There are many distractions internally within Europe and within the near neighborhood. And COVID-19 has introduced a fierce determination to ring-fence strategic sectors from takeover, not only by Beijing, but also by Washington. So lessons from the 2008 crisis have indeed been learned. When we take a look at Africa, Africa's interests are for investments, trade, financing for development, peace and security, problems in meeting the SDGs, problems of climate change. It's a huge continent, and interests across Africa are not necessarily either homogeneous. And the post-Cotonou negotiations with the EU, which guide the relations between the EU and the 79 countries of Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, have been stuck on issues on the African side on migration, human rights, the return of cultural artifacts. Many years ago, Africa would not have stood in the way of concluding negotiations on those issues. Today, we see an Africa much more assertive and standing up for issues in which it feels that it has a huge stake. Africa has a very good relationship with China. Financing for capital infrastructure has been vital. And despite talks of debt sustainability across Africa, China has offered a very important financing alternative for Africa. It plays a big role as well in Africa's business sector. Africa has growing ties with Asia. India is a growing investor. Trade with India is growing. So is trade with Asia, to the point where Asia is second only to the EU of importance in the trading partner to Africa. So Africa looks both east and west. Africa does not have an interest in choosing sides. And indeed, Africa needs all tables around which it can have a voice. And now to our conclusion, at least for me, our third and final question: how do we reconcile these competing interests? Where do we, in fact, find promises for common ground? And I will preface these very last remarks with the observation that the landscape against which this conversation is taking place, namely that of the geopolitical context, is one in which shifts in the balance of world power are occurring. There's a growing weight of economic and political power tilting from west to east. The world is moving from unipolarity to one which is bipolar, with a clutch of what I call great powers in waiting in the wings. And these, importantly, are from the ranks of emerging economies, the global south. I think very quickly, Indonesia, South Africa, India, Brazil, and there are others. The rising superpower is China, with whom many of the global south have long had long-standing affinity. So this new configuration of world power provides a wider menu of options from which the Global South can choose. And the backdrop provides several options, but I will close by picking only one. This scenario identifies two distinct groups, the Global South and the Global North. Africa and Asia, as we know, fit into one group, Europe in the other. Now, Africa, Asia already have strong and long experience in working together. They were part of the non-aligned movement during the Cold War. They also worked together in the fight against colonialism. And today they're part of the group G77 plus China in the UNGA. They will not choose between East and West. Some countries have strong security ties with the USA, all have strong investment and financial ties with China. China's model of influence by investments will continue to evolve over time, but will continue to play an important role in these regions, opening areas for new development and unlocking trade prospects. Now, increasing economic and political clout will translate into greater leverage, and countries in the Global South will be in a better position to have voices heard and influence policies which affect their future. India assumes presidency of the G20 August 2021 and the UN Security Council 2022. India will spearhead a development agenda shining spotlights on issues of concern for the Global South. There will therefore be also greater potential for South-South cooperation as all of these countries continue to prosper, and opportunities will also emerge for the Global South, Africa and Asia to redefine relations with Europe. Africa in post-Cotonou negotiations is, as we said already, standing firm on certain issues, and opportunities are emerging for South-South and triangular partnerships with Europe involving technology transfer, institutional building and reform, trade deals with all regions, and of course, Karim mentioned the importance of lessons through different instruments and stuff. Most importantly, the three regions will engage on issues of global governance for global public goods, trade, free markets, climate change, regulation of digital economies, and more. And there is strength in numbers. And to conclude, Asia, Africa, and Europe will cooperate in areas in which their interests, strategic and otherwise, converge. But changes in global power distribution will provide members of the Global South with both a wider menu of choice as well as negotiating leverage. But they must have the political will to seize these opportunities, and time will tell, Bushra, if indeed they really will. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Thank you, Len, for this very interesting insights, based on which we can see that the world is moving from unipolarity to bipolarity. And now let us hear from Professor Bruno Gittin. Professor, could we know more about a possible increase of China's influence in Asia due to the COVID-19 pandemic? And what could be the most importantly future implications for European Union, ASEAN partnership?
Well, good morning to you all. I would like to thank and express my gratitude to all the organizers, and I know that there are many of them, and I would like to include in my thanks the technical team also. I will do my best to answer these questions. First, I need to upload my presentation. I hope that it will work. Let's see. Yes, it seems to be the case. So I want to use a PowerPoint presentation to give some evidence of what I think is an opportunity for China to increase its influence over Asia, which was already strong before the pandemic, but which is stronger now. Sorry, yes. for different reasons. I would like to remind that the COVID-19 pandemic first created a supply shock in Asia with the disruption of global value chains. These supply chains of goods and services, which are very intensive between Southeast Asia and China, but also between all Asian countries. And it was due to the start of the pandemic in Wuhan, in China, from which many of the goods produced in Wuhan flows to the rest of Asia. And it was followed some weeks later by a demand shock for Asian countries when the pandemic spread to Europe, and the export from Asia to Europe just plummeted because of the lockdown in Europe, which reduced abruptly the demand for Asian goods. So in this context, we have seen that the COVID-19 reinforced previous trends that were observed before in Asia. A relative deglobalization.
Sorry, Bruno, you should open your presentation. We cannot see it.
You cannot see it? Oh,
we see only the screen, but not the presentation. Open it.
Okay, sorry. So what can I do? Because it says le partage. Okay. Can you see it now?
You have to click, I think.
Yes. So, and now can you see it?
No, you have to click on it. We only see the icon of the presentation. There you click.
Okay, I'm clicking on it. Can you see it now? It says that my click is in mode pause. So, okay, I should maybe click. Then when I click on start again the sharing, what can I do?
Okay, maybe just go ahead without the presentation.
Yes,
I mean, you use it, but okay.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'm starting to. Okay, that's really too bad. Yeah. Okay. So it says that I am sharing my screen now. Can you see it or not?
Bruno, okay. we can see your screen, but actually only with the icon of the presentation, not with the presentation itself. So just go on, because.
Okay. Sorry about that. Well, I will try to restart from where I was. Okay. So moving on, I would like to say that there were previous trends before the COVID pandemic, which was basically a relative deglobalization reflected by a decline of global trade and investment, a retreat from multilateralism, a digital transformation with the rise of e-business and e-commerce and e-work, and a growing regionalization, in particular of global value chain, to improve the resilience of trade and production in Asia. Now, in this context, I think that the COVID-19 will reinforce the dominance of China over the rest of Asia, and in particular Southeast Asia, for the following reasons. First, China is well placed in the global competition to supply vaccines against COVID-19, and China has signed several agreements with ASEAN member states to try the vaccines locally. And in the case of Indonesia, for instance, it would be followed by the production in Indonesia of Chinese vaccines. The second point is that China is already the largest trading partner of ASEAN, ahead of the EU, the USA, and Japan. And ASEAN is also China's second largest trading partner, which makes the region of particular interest for China when the rest of the economy of the world is plummeting. Third, China is now a growing investor in Southeast Asia and Asia at large, which is reinforced by the Belt and Road initiatives. And these investments are channeled into the transport and energy infrastructure in the region, which is, of course, very important to transport goods and services from China to Southeast Asia, but also from Southeast Asia to China. And this will be reinforced by the recent signature of the RCEP Trade and Investment Agreement, which includes all Asian countries from Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, but to the exclusion of the USA, Europe, and India, which makes China the largest power within the bloc. And one additional element is the fact that China has strengthened its connectivity with ASEAN before the COVID. So I'm coming to the figures that I wanted to share with you, but I will upload my presentation so that all the participants can see them later. I have calculated using data from the UNCTAD, a bilateral connectivity index between China, all Southeast Asia, and India, China, Korea, and the USA. It is a connectivity index based on maritime transport between China and all these countries. And it is a bilateral connectivity index, so it shows the intensity of maritime transport between China and all countries of the region and outside of Asia. And in the case of China, we can clearly see when you have the chart in front of your eyes that between 2006 until 2019, this bilateral connectivity between China and the countries involved has increased in all cases, and sometimes spectacularly, between, for instance, China and Malaysia, or China and the Philippines, or China and Singapore. And it has also increased with European countries like Germany or Japan and the USA. While when you look at the intensity of the bilateral maritime transport between Japan and all Asian countries, you may observe that it has decreased with all the countries of Southeast Asia, and it has also decreased with Germany, with Korea, and the USA. So it shows that even before the pandemic, China was increasing its relations with all important Asian countries, and even with Europe and the USA, which is important because 70% of international trade, use maritime transport, and it shows the growing importance of China within the region. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because for me, China has a clear advantage during the pandemic, and it will be the case after the pandemic. I would like to use the last 2 minutes I may have to talk about Europe and say some words about it. Prior to the pandemic, the EU was mainly focused on signing trade agreements, trade and investment agreements with Asian countries. So far, it has succeeded to sign such agreements with Japan, with Vietnam and Singapore in 2019, but not with ASEAN as such. There are difficulties to sign a broader agreement, but in particular because of circumscribed issues such as the palm oil, which is very important for Malaysia and Indonesia because it is one of their major industries. And you know that the European Union has decided to curb the use of palm oil for environmental reasons, and I think that they are right to have these kinds of concerns. There is also a human rights issue, in particular the Rohingya issue in Myanmar, which is important viewed from the European side, which are obstacles for an agreement with ASEAN as such. And beyond these difficulties, I think that there are other reasons that explain why the image of the EU in Asia is a bit faded. First, during the pandemic, the EU, which is the example of political integration and the most advanced political integration experience in the world, the EU appeared disunited. The borders were shut unilaterally between member states. The EU Commission looked powerless and unable to coordinate the member states, in particular in healthcare area. I remember that Italy asked explicitly the EU help to provide medical equipment, and no European countries came to the rescue of Italy at the time, and it was a shocking, experience for Italians, but also it was looked at from the rest of the world as an incapacity of the EU to help its member states. And now the EU is not also at the forefront of vaccines against the COVID-19 epidemic, so that Asia is looking once again to China to provide the first vaccines. And there are a lot, as I said, a lot of agreements between Southeast Asia and China for that matter. And when it is not China, it is more the USA which will be able to provide the vaccines. And I think that Europe has lost a strong opportunity to show to Asia what it was able to do in terms of help. And finally, I would like to conclude by saying that the EU looks over-dependent on China for medical supplies, in the same way that Southeast Asia is also dependent on China for medical supplies, because the main production of these medical equipment and so forth is from China. And this is an additional reason for Southeast Asia to strengthen its relation with China for critical supplies, and not to look to the EU for important supplies during the pandemic. So to conclude, and I'm sorry for these technical problems, after the pandemic, the EU will have to make up the lost ground. and I don't think that it will be easy. Sorry for this problem. I have finished my presentation, and I am giving the floor to you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Jetin, for this very interesting perspective. Now, Professor Kidan Kiros, we are looking forward to hearing from you about the geopolitical importance of the Horn of Africa for the triangular relationship of Europe, Africa, and Asia. Please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Well, actually, as it has been mentioned, the topic of my presentation is on the geopolitical importance of the Horn of Africa, especially in relationship to the dynamics of Europe, Africa, and that of Asia. So the outline of my presentation is that first, I'll be talking about the importance, the strategic importance of this particular region of Africa, and then I'll try to mention some of the describing characteristic features of the Horn African region, and of course, the competitions that exist actually over strategic interests in this particular region will be also some of the issues that I will be discussing briefly. And then finally, I'll be looking at the potential for synergy and partnership across the three continents from the perspective of that particular region. So, well, generally, when you look at when we talk about the Horn of Africa, well, traditionally, it refers to 4 countries of Eritrea, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Somalia. But my presentation includes or uses a broader understanding of the Horn of Africa, which includes the Sudan, South Sudan, Kenya, and of course, Uganda as well. Sorry. This is when I say Horn of Africa, I'm referring to this particular region. And then, well, this Horn of Africa region is one of the most geostrategically important regions of the world. And then this is located, or the Horn of Africa is actually located at the prime physical or geographical location, which is at the crossroads of the 3 continents of Europe, Africa, and Asia. So in this case, this Horn of Africa as a region is a gateway to Asia, and then at the same time, not only to Asia, but it's also a gateway to the Middle East. And then Africa has also a deep relationship with important countries in Asia, including India, China, and of course, I also mentioned the Middle East, with which Africa has trade and investment relationships or deals. So this Horn of Africa, since it's located on one side of the major sea lanes of the world, or since it's located on one side of the main choke points of the world in terms of sea lanes communication, well, this is therefore very important in terms of the Red Sea, because Red Sea is, as you all know, the artery that is one of the artery of global trade. Say, for instance, if you take the European Union, most of the European Union member states trade in terms of volume is transported by more than 90% is transported by sea. and then almost 20% of the global trade pass through the Gulf of Aden, and then this makes it very important. And then this location, that is what we call Horn of Africa, together of course with the Red Sea, controls the passage especially from the Red Sea as a whole to the Gulf of Aden, and of course from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. So this is very important. In this case, political control of countries in the Horn of Africa. When I say political control, I'm trying to refer maintaining security and stability in the Horn of African region at large permits, therefore, logistical access to other countries in both North and Central Africa, as well as, of course, to the Arabian Peninsula and the Middle East. So as a result, this region, the Horn of Africa region, attracts a considerable effort from international players to safeguard trade through this strategic area. So looking at some of the characteristic features and some challenges of this region, which is known as the Horn of Africa, well, first of all, we need to keep at the back of our mind that this Horn of Africa region is the most deprived and, of course, the poorest region in Africa. Even we can say it's also the poorest region. And then at the same time, this is the most conflict-ridden regions in the world. Well, when we say conflict-ridden region, the conflict is within societies in a given state, and then it is also interstate conflicts. So conflicts are both intrastate and interstate. Well, there are so many reasons. There is a colonial legacy, there are political and economic, of course, problems, especially when it comes, in terms of the nature of state power. This is very key, important source of conflict in that particular region, where you have an unfinished job of state building, which is the main source of conflict, be it intrastate or interstate conflict. Of course, I'm not saying that that is the only reason for the conflict, but at least it is one of the main reason or source of conflict. In addition, there are other several challenges in that particular region, which are still predominant. You have access to shared resources and environmental degradation. We can take as an example the dispute that we witness among or between the Nile River riparian countries, because the eastern, this valley, the Nile basin, specifically the western part, is part of the Horn of Africa. And then you have, as I said, the nature of the state power, which is based on coercion rather than persuasion. This is also a challenge. International terrorism is there. And then maritime and energy insecurity is also a challenge. So due to of course, the region's proximity to the Middle East, and then, of course, there are also homegrown insurgency. This area or this region or the Horn of Africa it has a mix of local and global political security interests. And then, as a result, it is an easy playground for players outside the region and outside Africa. So there is one overriding truth about this specific region of the continent of Africa. It's a wide geographical space with strategic importance. We should not be treated with indifference, or we should not be ignored. by actors or stakeholders, and at the same time, it should not be manipulated. So it's a very fragile region which has with important strategic implications, be it to Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and Africa itself. So this is very important to keep in mind. Then about the competition, there are competitions over strategic interest, as I said. There is an increased attention from both traditional partners and, of course, emerging powers due to different reasons. And then almost over the last 2 decades, the region has gone or has undergone a major transformation. It hosts few of the fastest growing economies in the world, growing middle income class attracting, and then potential to become a major market for consumer goods, potential for expansion of trade and investment. You have too many global and regional rivalries for influence in the politics, economic and development and of course security of the Horn of Africa. You have 3 largest traditional partners, including China, the European Union, and the United States, of course, one way or the other. You have traditional partners, largest traditional partners, both from Europe and of course Asia. And then there is a growing, as I said, growing competition between emerging and regional powers, including Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United States, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Israel, South Africa even, and then Egypt. If you look at, for instance, in Djibouti, you have around 7 countries like United Arab Emirates, Turkey, USA, France, Saudi Arabia, Japan, China. So in the best interest of time, I will not go on into details. So in this case, well, of course, you have the emerging role of Asian powers, especially Japan, India, and China, as we said. And then there is also a competition between the 2 Middle East political blocs. You have United Arab Emirates and then Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Egypt, of course, in Eritrea, and of course Somaliland. You have Turkey and Qatar in Somalia and Sudan. And then there is also an implication that Russia is also coming back to this particular region. So a combination of these geopolitical forces and regional ambitions, of course, has made the Horn of Africa one of the most politically dynamic or volatile regions in the world. So these new relationships will, of course, present new challenges and opportunities to the traditional colonial and post-colonial powers. So what are finally the potential for synergy and partnership across the 3 continents? Well, the competition for influence in the Horn of Africa. The Horn of Africa, as we said, as a crossroads to these 3 continents because of the location. Then the issue is it an opportunity or is a risk for the tripartite or triangular dynamics or partnership of this Europe, Asia, and Africa? Or what does the competition mean to this dynamics or to this potential partnership of Europe, Asia, and of course Africa? Well, I would say it's good that we have competition. The problem is that if the strategies that are being used during the process of this competition are aimed at countering, well, the influence of a competitor, then it will not be constructive. But there is also possibility of both competition and cooperation based on, of course, economic, ideological, political, and security interests. We don't expect that all those competing world and regional powers will have similar economic, ideological, political, and security interests. Well, of course, they might differ in ideological, for instance, and political interests, but at the same time, there may be significant complementarity in economic and security interests. I think finding a common ground with either the economic, ideological, political, or security interests of the three continents would pay, or rather would pave a way toward stability and coherence of that particular important region, which is important, geopolitically extremely important, not only to Africa itself, but to Europe and Asia, and beyond for that matter. So from my perspective, yes, there is competition, but we can use or we can change that competition into our own advantage, and then the partnership that is going to take place between Europe, Africa, and Asia should try to find out a common ground so that at least there will be a minimum understanding and cooperation in order to achieve the necessary stability and security of that extremely very important region. Otherwise, keep in mind that it's sensitive, it's volatile. There are so many issues, the regional competitions. You have the crisis in Yemen, you have crisis in the Horn of Africa itself. But this partnership is very important. And then what will happen in the future, especially in the coming decade, that is my take. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor, for your valuable insights. We are running out of time. I think under your control, even we can dedicate 10 more minutes for comments. Dear guests, please feel free to share your comments.
I may just go in if you allow. Thank you, the three of you. You have actually described in a quite comprehensive way a setting of multiple geopolitical dynamics. On the one hand, Len has described how high geopolitics, I would say, both the US and China, but also the global South strategies interact and may converge around a common strategy or agenda. Then Bruno underlined the new opportunities for China to take advantage even of the COVID-19 crisis to promote its role, in particular in Asia. And Kidan, of course, has reminded us that Africa is there, and that in particular the Horn of Africa plays a key role and has at the same time some major challenges to face and some major opportunities for all partners. My question, it would be interesting, is if you can provide a few more elements. Len, you have mentioned that at the very beginning of your chat on scenarios for converging interests that might articulate strategies for cooperation, for partnership between the three continents. For me, this is a key issue that I would like to take away, I would say, from your converging or complementary sometimes presentations. Thank you.
Ivan, just very quickly, come back to you on this. I think there are two possible points of conversion. One in which all interests are best served, and that's Africa, Asia, and the European Union. And by that, I mean there is strength in numbers. I mean, there are a lot of countries involved, and they all have an appetite for international public goods and the international agenda. And by that, I mean keeping markets open. We talk about free trade. We're talking about globalization, even though there's a lot that needs to be fixed. We talk about climate change. We talk about the global commons. All regions have view these elements as being critical. And in all of these elements, the EU has taken a lead role, particularly in the last 4 years when we have seen an America quite absent. We can expect solidarity with Europe on the global agenda because already President-elect Biden has been talking about mending the transatlantic relationship, shoring up security again with NATO, but most importantly, working together on that international agenda. And so with support of the United States already, he's appointed Kerry as his climate change czar, for example. That speaks to the importance of climate change on the agenda of the president-elect, because the president-elect and Kerry will engage very, very closely, of course, on this particular issue and others. So I think the global agenda is one in which we will see the three regions engaging very, very much. I see a lot more by way of synergies between Africa and Asia. Asia is not that well known materially to Africa in the same way. And by that, I'm not talking about China, except that we know that India is investing more. Even Thailand is making inroads in trade. And so is China has always been a presence from centuries ago. But I think that, Karim spoke about getting to know each other more from a point of view of the soft diplomacy point of view, exchanges, academic exchanges, the sort of research that we're doing. Right now, we're putting a number of us who would not have normally spoken in contact, and we are all ambassadors for that sort of fluidity. So I think there are regional opportunities, there are bilateral opportunities, there are continent-continent opportunities. But wherever there is shared interest, I think that we will find the three regions cooperating more, where they see their best and wider interests better served by coming together. And the fourth and final thing that I will say is that it would seem to me that it's in the interest of Africa, interest of EU, and the interest of Asia to converge and to speak a lot more and develop strategic alliances. Because let's, for argument's say that we have Biden for the next 4 years, but only for one term. We know that the movement that has been started by a Trump presidency in the United States is not going to go away. There is a lot of tension even within allies saying if the US has retreated once before in this way, they can do it again. So the world has not stayed still. The world has moved on, and each regional bloc is very keen on building new alliances, maintaining and consolidating those alliances, and thinking strategically of their own interests going forward until we see what really happens with the United States. That's what I could contribute, Ivan.
Okay. Any other comment? Ivan?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay.
Very good answer, actually.
Okay. Idan, Bruno? Okay.
Well,
So thank you for your attention, and I hope these interventions and discussions will allow us a better understanding of the challenges that will be faced Europe, Africa, and Asia. And I have no doubt in the positive outcomes of such a fruitful conference, panel, through the valuable conference of our esteemed guests, Len, Kidan, and Bruno. Thank you.
Thank
thanks
you.
to you.
Yes, with pleasure. I cannot start the video myself. I think technicians have to do that. Anyhow, good morning on my behalf as well. My name is Jean Don from Ghent University, and I have the pleasure to moderate the second session, which will concentrate on the instruments. I will shortcut a little bit on the introductions to catch up on time. So let me just say that we will have three presentations by Dr. Taragazide from Tokai University, Japan, by Ivan Martin himself, we know by now, and Dr. Nisit Pantalit from Chiang Mai University. So without further ado, Dr. Taragizade, can you start your presentation, please?
Thank you very much, John. So first of all, I would like to express my thanks to the organizers for providing me to present in this event. I'm joining you from Tokyo, so let me share my screen. Okay, is it clear now? Is it clear?
Very well, thank you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So my talk is on infrastructure, especially I'm focusing on green infrastructure, and also what are the role of, what could be the new financial instruments in order to facilitate, the infrastructure development. So this is outline of my presentation, introduction, challenges for development of these projects. And also after talking about the challenges, I will focus on the solutions, institutional investors, a spillover effect, green credit guarantee, and finally, conclusion and providing some policy recommendation for Asia and Africa. So I'm focusing on green infrastructure. So a major part of green infrastructure is related to energy. In order to have a better picture, so I provided this figure, which is clearly showing that currently in Asia Pacific and also in Africa, the energy consumption is dominating by fossil fuels. In Asia Pacific, almost 88%, and in Africa, as it's clear here, almost same ratio is dominating by fossil fuels, and share of renewable energy resources is scarce. And so it is important to develop domestic green infrastructural projects and relying more on renewable energy resources, which is in line with several SDGs, for example, SDG 7, SDG 11, directly related to that, or SDG 13, 3, 14, and 15. So this is important not only for the environmental matters, which is highlighted, which has been highlighted in these SDGs, but also in order to increase the energy security in Africa and also in Asia, because the majority of the renewable energy resources are domestic. So therefore, developing more domestic energy resources, indigenous resources, will reduce the reliance on import, which is in favor of the self-sufficiency and also increasing the energy security. So, but renewable energy resources have difficulties in accessing to finance, and green infrastructural projects are also same. So we have this book that I edited jointly with Professor Sachs, Jeffrey Sachs, Wintai Wu, and Professor Yoshino. So we try to provide different financial instruments that can fill this big gap, green financing gap. And today I'm going to, in my presentation, I'm going to talk about 2 or 3 examples from this book. So in order to show that what is the size of the investment which is required, here I brought some figures from developing Asia. I couldn't find the relevant data on Africa. But I mean, from the total infrastructure requirement, climate adjusted infrastructure requirement between 2016 until 2013, about 14.7 trillion US dollar is for the power sector. This is the requirement if developing Asia, if Asia Pacific wants to keep on this the current level of economic growth and the current level of job creation. In order to keep the same growth path, 14.17 trillion US dollar investment is required just in the power sector, and 8.4 trillion US dollar is required in the transportation sector. After that, telecommunication, water, and sanitation. So in Asia, the largest requirement is in East Asia. And after that, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and the Pacific. But up to now, I explained about the big size of this investment which is required. But what is the challenge, or what are the challenges that we couldn't fill this gap until now? So there are several challenges associated with developing green infrastructure. First of all, lack of long-term financing, because infrastructural projects are long-term projects. Therefore, long-term finance is required. Secondly, there are various risks associated with green infrastructures. And because of these risks, investors and financiers are reluctant to enter to these projects. Thirdly, rate of return of this project is usually low. For example, when talking about renewable technology, many of these technologies are new technologies and expensive. So comparing to fossil fuel projects that date back to almost 100 years ago, their rate of return is lower. And fourthly, lack of capacity in the market actor. So when I'm presenting for many government officials in the different capacity building events that we organize, many of them are not familiar that what is green and what is green infrastructure. So lack of capacity in the market actor is another thing. So when we are talking about the financing part, the problem is coming from here that the Asian and African financial systems are still bank dominate, and bank resources are not very suitable for financing infrastructural projects, because bank resources are coming from deposits. Deposits are short to medium term. Deposits are usually 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But these projects are long term, 10 years, 20 years. So if we allocate bank resources for these projects, it will be maturity mismatch. Therefore, we need to look for a longer term financing. Secondly, as I've mentioned, there are several risks associated with this project. Technology risk, feasibility matter, exchange rate, because many of these projects are depending on supply chain. A global supply chain or a regional supply chain. Therefore, the exchange rate is matter. And many other risks which are conventional. Okay, from now I will explain a few minutes on the solutions. So one solution is to bring the institutional investors. As I have mentioned, banks are not very suitable, but institutional investors are very suitable. Institutional investors such as insurance companies, pension funds, these are holding long-term money. These are holding 20 years money, 30 years money, 40 years money. But unfortunately, just in OECD member countries, less than 1% of their resources, the resource of institutional investors, is allocating for infrastructural projects. So institutional investors in OECD member countries, they have almost 100 trillion US dollar asset under management, but less than $1 trillion US dollar is allocating. So in Asia and Africa, the share is much lower because they don't have a well-developed pension funds and insurance system. But many of the Asian countries, they are aging and they need to develop pension funds. So Japan is already an aged country. So Japan has a well-developed pension fund, but Thailand will face similar problem. China will face similar problem. So these countries also need to establish pension funds and using their resources for such kind of long-term project. Second solution is to utilize the spillover effect coming from infrastructural project. I mentioned that the rate of return of infrastructural project is low. So this is the reason that many investors are reluctant to enter to it. But we proposed a policy, and it already proposed to some developing countries, that in order to increase the rate of return of the project, we can utilize the spillover effect. But what is the spillover effect? So imagine that there is this region, that this region doesn't have, for example, power supply, or it doesn't have infrastructure in it. Then government has planned for establishing an infrastructure over there. Then by establishing this infrastructure, that, for example, this infrastructure is a power supply, more businesses will grow in the surrounding region. More, for example, more small and medium-sized enterprises, more restaurants, more hotels will grow in the surrounding region. The total output of that region will increase. This increase in the total output is called a spillover effect of infrastructure. And after that, governments can collect more taxes from this region. This is called a spillover tax. What we propose is that a portion of this tax need to be returned back to the investors in order to increase the rate of return of this project. So we model this, and the paper is also available. It's published in Economic Modeling. And injecting a portion of the spillover tax into the projects will increase the rate of return of the project. That will make the projects interesting. So we use the same method in order to calculate the spillover effect of an infrastructure. So there is a road established in Philippines. It's called a Star Road, which is almost 41 kilometers. And so after establishment of this road, more businesses started to grow in the surrounding of this road. And here we calculated the taxes that the local governments in the city of Lipa, Iban, Batangas, in the surrounding could collect. T0 is the year of completion of this project, and it shows the taxes that local governments collected from that region. T1, T+1 shows 1 year after, T+2 shows 2 years after, and T+4, 4 years after. As it's clear, the tax revenue after 1 year reduced, after 2 years also reduced, but after 3 years increased. After 4 years, it almost doubled. This is a spillover effect. And in order to increase the rate of return of the infrastructural projects in Africa and also in Asia, for having more private sector, this is important. Another solution is establishing a green credit guarantee. This is a policy that we proposed first time. So credit guarantee corporations, I mean we, it means myself with my co-authors. So credit guarantee corporations are existing. It's not a new institution. History of credit guarantee corporation back to almost 1937, when the first credit guarantee corporation established in Japan. And after that, it went to, different parts of Asia, Europe, America, also in Africa, we have credit guarantee corporations. So credit guarantee corporations are public entities that guarantee a certain level of lending to some projects. Currently, in majority of the countries that have credit guarantee corporation, CGC or credit guarantee corporations are active only for small and medium-sized enterprises, only for facilitating the lending to a small and medium-sized enterprises. What we propose is to expand the same scheme for green infrastructure, because by this way, governments can increase the lending of the private banks or private financial institutions to these green infrastructural projects, and the risk will be lower because a portion of the risk is covered by the government. And these papers, which is also available, this shows how to utilize it. And establishment of the green credit guarantee scheme can reduce the information asymmetry and will increase the lending to the projects. But it's very important to have an optimal credit guarantee scheme. It means not providing same guarantee ratio for all banks, and also not providing same guarantee scheme for all projects. Project needs to be assessed and their risk needs to be assessed. Let me conclude my talks and also provide some policy recommendations. So for Africa, for Asia, and also for the rest of the world, it's very important that too much reliance on overseas finance will create future burden for the country. Too much creation of external debt will lead to very risky situation, especially for developing economies in Asia and Africa. Circulating domestic saving to domestic investment and maximizing non-debt financing such as FDI or remittance are key. Lack of long-term financing, existence of various risks, low rate of return, and lack of capacity in the market actors are the major challenges for development of green infrastructure. Institutional investors such as insurance companies and pension funds are potential long-term investors in green infrastructural projects. Utilizing tax revenue by use of the spillover effect of infrastructure will increase the rate of return, and it's an incentive for private investors. The green credit guarantee scheme will reduce the asymmetry of information and will reduce the expected default loss. Therefore, will cover a part of risk for unlocking the private investment into green infrastructure. And in order to avoid moral hazard, credit guarantee ratio needs to be different and needs to depend on the credit worthiness of the borrowers and financial institutions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Tagizadeh, for this interesting talk and sharing your insight in this concrete and crucial aspect of energy and infrastructure and power. I have the feeling that this will provide a valuable contribution to policy recommendations that we envisage. So now I'd like to offer the floor to Ivan Martin from the Policy Center itself on the new partnership frameworks.
Thank you.
Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jan. I first of all, thank you, Farhad, as well, for landing the geopolitical analysis we had in the first session down to infrastructure and infrastructure finance challenges. I think this is a quite interesting development of the analysis we had before. And as far as I know, we are going back from Tokyo to Madrid, and from infrastructure and funding instruments to partnership instruments and partnership frameworks. Karim El Ainaoui, in his presentation at the very beginning of the seminar, has underlined the importance of partnerships and instruments, partnership instruments to promote peace in some contexts, which is already, of course, a very important issue, and actually to lever cooperation and promote, for instance, the public goods Len Ismail was mentioning before. In my paper, I will start by reviewing some facts and some trends which are important to understand, I think, the new dynamics of partnership between Europe and Africa. I will skip this today for the sake of time, and I will go directly to the two parts of my paper and my presentation. The first one on partnership frameworks for EU, Africa, and Asia, actually, partnership, and the second one on partnership instruments. On partnership frameworks, we have, of course, still ongoing the Africa-European Union partnership. which dates back to more than 10 years now, and which is to be replaced by the new comprehensive strategy of the EU with Africa, launched at the beginning of 2020 in March this year. And we also have the strategic partnership with China, Japan, and ASEAN countries, the latter in 2019, agreed between those groups of countries and the European Union. And we have, as we will see, many others. So the first question that seems to me very relevant is to question ourselves, what does partnership mean for the European Union? If we review partnerships which are there officially established, there is a certain degree of confusion of what is the concept of partnership. We have strategic partnerships with China, Japan, Mexico, Russia, of course China, all the big powers throughout the world, the United States, Canada, between the European Union, and in those cases, the partnership seems to me a kind of a strategic framework for relations with these third countries. Then, if you look at the Africa-EU partnership, this is rather a continent-to-continent framework for cooperation. But then you have the economic partnership agreements with ACP countries, in some cases with regions without, like CARICOM within those ACP countries, in some other cases like Ghana or Ivory Coast with specific countries. And in this case, partnership means economic partnership means rather trade and development agreements regulating economic relations. And then you have the new EU comprehensive strategy with Africa that is articulated, in fact, around 5 partnerships: green transition, digital transformation, sustainable growth and jobs, peace and governance, and migration and mobility. In this case, partnership refers to sectoral partnerships. And then in the region of the Mediterranean, you have the privileged partnership established in 2014 with Tunisia. And in 2019, the European Union and Morocco accepted to launch a partnership, Partenariat Euro-Marocain de Prospérité Partagée, a partnership for shared prosperity between Europe and Morocco. In this case, it rather looks a kind of a political framework for some kind of a status of privileged cooperation between Morocco and Tunisia on the one hand, and the European Union on the other. So it seems that there is a need for a kind of general theory of partnerships in the European Union, and to sort out this confusion of the concept of the very concept of partnership. Some questions that seem to me relevant in this setting is first, whether we assist to a return of regionalism in the European Union, and this is of course linked to the issue of the returning of global value chains and a re-regionalization of global value chains as a response to the COVID crisis. And what is the perimeter of the European economic space in this framework? And this, of course, has implications for the Euro-Mediterranean partnership, to which extent it is going to be somehow diluted into a wider Euro-African partnership, and what is the role of the European neighborhood policy in this framework. Second issue that seems to me, and I will try to address in my paper, is whether is the nature of these partnerships. Are they bilateral partnerships between equal partners? This is, in theory, what is intended, but actually very often they are, I would say, multilateral diffuse partnerships between 2 regions, like Europe and Africa on the one hand, and some other times they rather look as unilateral partnerships of the EU managing cooperation with partners, with third country partners. So this is another issue which seems important to address. So in any case, as Len already mentioned in her presentation before, we need a new partnership framework reconciling, this is where Len mentioned, finding a points of convergence between the priorities of Europe on the one hand and the priorities of Africa on the other hand. For Europe now, mainly migration and security, very clearly. For Africa, rather development, employment, human security, and into a fully integrated continent-to-continent approach. And this requires new institutions, new decision-making procedures, and new implementation mechanisms. Let's look now at the partnership instruments as such. I will review them very quickly, but in my paper, the idea is to review and assess each of the partnership instruments I'm going to mention now. Well, of course, the first partnership instrument are free trade areas in the European neighborhood, comprehensive free trade areas, deep and comprehensive free trade areas. But I will leave this to Larabi, Professor Jairi, who will make a presentation focused on that in the next panel. Then a second instrument, which is widespread across all, throughout all partnerships, is political dialogue, a kind of surveillance mechanism based on mutual interest. It is very often the first step for all other forms of cooperation and partnership, and it would be interesting to see to which extent this political dialogue could be somehow mutualized into, for instance, triangular political partnerships under certain conditions. I will come back to this in the discussion or in the paper anyway. A third kind, which somehow belongs to the political dialogue instrument, are the sectoral mobility partnerships or partnerships frameworks on migration, or dialogues on mobility and migration, or migration compacts, depending on the partners and this plethora, this proliferation of names, labels, and instruments for partnership in the mobility and migration sectors reflects how the European Union, at least since 2015, has grappled with how to manage relations with third countries in the field of migration. And very often they come down to some form of policy or political dialogue, which is not very effective in terms of regulating cooperation between the European Union and third countries. And then we have financial cooperation instruments, of course, which are the core of EU relations of cooperation with their partners, including in Asia as well. The new multi-annual financial framework of the European Union, which is about to be approved, establishes a new neighborhood development and international cooperation instrument, which brings together, merges a plethora of 8 different financial instruments that were in force and implemented for the last 7 years, since 2014. Including all development aid of the European Union, and including also the partnership instrument that was established in 2014 for funding actions of cooperation with strategic partners like China, like ASEAN, like Japan, like the countries I mentioned before. This goes now into the new neighborhood development and international cooperation instrument. First issue is that the EU is becoming more and more ambitious in terms of global reach and global partnerships, but actually the financial envelope in the last status of the multi-annual financial framework for 2021-2027 has been frozen. Basically, there will be 70.8 billion euros over the 7 years for the whole world, which is a very marginal increase of a few hundred millions over 2014 to 2020. So more ambition, same resources. And second issue, which is also important, is how it will be possible or not to reconcile development cooperation actions, which basically aim to promote development and reforms in less developed countries, with the partnership instrument, the cooperation with strategic partners, which intend to aim to advance the core interest of the European Union, and this is explicitly stated in the partnership instrument regulation. So these two different objectives within a single instrument poses some issues. Then there is the innovative financial instruments as part of this big neighborhood development and international cooperation instrument, such as blending, the guarantees. There is 60 billion reserved for providing external action guarantees for actions in the external action, which is a lot of money, of course. And this somehow links my presentation to that by Farhad, because it is out of this new or a strengthened instrument that this kind of infrastructure funding, for instance, could be mobilized. And final point on financial instruments is the big brand new instrument of the European Union, which is the Next Generation EU, or the so-called Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is the response of the European Union to the COVID-19, and it mobilizes 750 billion euros, basically for member states in Europe to face the consequences of COVID and the crisis provoked by COVID. Interestingly here is that at the beginning of the negotiations for this Next Generation EU fund, this Recovery and Resilience Facility, this facility had an external dimension. It could be mobilized also to cooperate with partners, third country partners. This is not anymore the case. This has been removed from the facility, and this says something about the priorities of the European Union right now. I'm coming to the conclusion of my presentation by more normative propositions. First, the European Union has already experienced in triangular cooperation. Actually, in the framework of the cooperation with ACP countries, in the framework of the Cotonou Agreement, there is the European Union ACP South-South and triangular cooperation, which has been working already for the last years, and that could be expanded and used as a pilot experience to promote some actions with Africa and Asia as well. So far, it was only within ACP countries and with EU support that this could happen. But also, for instance, in Latin America, the EU is funding the so-called Facility on Triangular Cooperation, called Adelante Forwards, is the Spanish name for forwards. And even in the European neighborhood policy, there are some small possibilities for South-to-South cooperation, for instance, between local authorities across borders in neighboring countries. So we need to think and to develop this kind of triangular cooperation instruments, and this is, of course, fully instrumental for our analysis here of triangulation possibilities between Europe, Africa, and Asia. I finalize with my take, which is important on the partnerships as opposed to unilateral cooperation. Very often what hides behind partnerships so far is the European Commission managing EU funds with third countries. And this, of course, comes down to unilateral cooperation. What is needed, in my opinion, is a new institutional framework mutualizing the management of those funds and those partnership instruments, and a true equal or partnership between equals involving a common identification of priorities, involving a distribution of resources according to agreed criteria and involving even co-management in the implementation of the decisions. Without these three conditions, it is very difficult to give a real substantial meaning to the concept of partnership. And I think that the European Union, in the framework of Europe, Africa, Asia partnerships, but also beyond, has a dire need of this conceptual clarification. And thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Ivan. We really have to admire your attempt of taking up the challenge of giving us a synthesis on this very complex political landscape of the current partnerships. But and we all can agree you have a successful in doing that. And I surely think this will contribute to the ambition of our group here to formulate the way forward. So I'd now like to give the floor to Dr. Nisit Pantamit from Chiang Mai University in the last presentation in this session on Thailand's role in promoting EU-ASEAN relationship and exchanges. Dr. Pantamit, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to say thank you to all kind of the organizers and that arrange this event. So I also represent the talk about how can we create like that kind of the relationship, the partnership, the dynamic after 2020, because we're running out of time and everyone want to focus on what we have. At a Thailand standing point, we are the members of ASEAN. And for most of you just have heard that a week ago, 10 countries in ASEAN plus 5 countries, we call ASEAN plus 5, agreed to officially, accept the platform of the RCEP, RCEP, by having CJK, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. That is also a delightful direction for ASEAN. So on the behalf of Thailand, that is also in the middle in terms of geopolitics and geography. We think that is a good way of our standing point, because Thailand, we have been called ourselves like the landmark of the ASEAN in the mainland and the inland, not the maritime. That's why Thailand has been approached by China, by Japan, and also Korea. And also we have been in touch, of course, with Europeans, EU for a very long time. How can we jump from here? After the COVID-19, everything's like changed. Right now, if you talk about the environment of the partnership, it has been cut across the continent, except on what we are now create a new platform of 2020 by using like the webinar instead. So every day, people in academic way of life is just like to pretend the webinar. So some days, some week like this week, I have 3 webinars. One with ASEAN Part 3, China, Japan, and Korea. So live from Tokyo. And another one is from Guangxi. That is one of China ASEAN think tank network. And now I am standing in front of the screen and now having so many, brilliant scholars and knowledge from all over the continents. That is what I want to focus in my next 5 minutes. So how can we jump from here? Look at the slide. The slide that I want to show here show some kind of 2 case studies. A 2 case study that's starting from the location. So what you have informed or learned about Thailand is like, we do not involve in the political hotspots. That is one thing, except the headline news for the number of days that you see that the politics event in Bangkok. That is happened and is one of fundamental things not only occur in Thailand, but also in other countries, I think. So by ignore that kind of atmosphere, a stable countries in terms of geography and the fundamental way of Thailand means we can move around. You're looking at the point that we are now staying in. We have China, we are on the left-hand side, we have Myanmar, we have India, and also, we have the gateway to, Europe and the Middle East. On the right-hand side, on the coastal area, we also have China, Japan, and Korea, and also in the Pacific Oceans. By having the situations of no headache access in the Indian Oceans, this is why we can accumulate the networks. The networks of Africa, the network from Europe, and also ASEAN from 5 countries, and also we also have bilateral agreement with India. By the way, that is also means that from Thailand's standing point, you can go to the upper portion of ASEAN easier. What I mean in the upper portion of ASEAN, I mean in 4 countries that is called CLMV. Okay, Cambodia, C, L stand for Laos, Myanmar, M, V is Vietnam, and T is Thailand. So by coming into this point, anything that you can jump from Thailand can be easier to access that. Let me show you. A few weeks ago, I also and my friends mostly in the ASEAN centers in these 5 countries agreed to set up, we call the platform about the poverty alleviation platform. We want to create a university network. How can we reduce the poverty, Professor Evan, Professor Chan? Because this is the main problem of our region. And you cannot move the partnership to any, like strengthen in the further cooperations by not get rid of the starting point. So poverty is the main thing, but the platform is good. Like a case study from Africa, from Europe, from, Japan that has good of technologies like infrastructure that Professor Fahad mentions about green investment, a green infrastructure, and the partnerships from platform that Professor Evan just mentions. And also I'm very delightful about the concepts that scholars from Africa just mentioned earlier in the previous section. That is why by having this kind of platform, I also thinking about how can Thailand can play like not the big role, let's play like important role, to hook up, to be the network, to plug in to any other member state of ASEAN. Here we go. Education. Because among 600 million people that we are now living in ASEAN, not Asians, not including Japan, China, and also Korea, we are now having increasing number of the students. We also transfer the credit, just like the European system have. We call AUN, ASEAN University Network. So students can also go back and forth. I also have class online and also have students from China, study with me every day. So I just finished that class about the Chinese economy and ASEAN economy. Like also I read this is information from the previous webinar with Ghent University. So this is a platform. From level of students, we also can be the ambassador, okay, to transfer and strengthen. Of course, we have the many participation, our volunteers and overcares and retirees, as citizens, a university international forum that we're now creating. Yesterday, I was amazed when a scholar from Cambodia mentioned about a 100 village model. And I'm listening to him carefully. He said, we are now sending like a scholar from the capital, mostly they are from university, to go into the village and to help and ask and accumulate the data. What kind of the basic things or infrastructure that they want. So this is something that, oh, okay, Thailand also have the same thing. We also have one village, one university. So I also want to share with you that from this standing point and from the problem that we are now dealing with, a tourism income from Thailand is almost have like a negative growth, and 70 and 90% of the 5-star and 4-star hotel in Chiang Mai, you know, the second largest city of the tourism beyond Phuket, has been like 70 and 80% discount. That is a supply of the hotels. So if you want to mention about how can we bring the tourists, that is very hard from our like standing point of Thailand. But we also thinking about the domestic point will be the first priority, but having a more information and cooperations and the knowledge, that will be long-term partnership. That will be a dynamic way of cooperation between Africa, from Europe, and also ASEAN. That is what I want to propose to this forum. So thank you very much. That is the end of my talk and presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Nisit, for this interesting insights. And as a fascinating example how our local player, Thailand, for instance, is developing a strategy that balances national, regional, and inter-regional interests. And I'm personally particularly thrilled by the recent emerging process of integrating university and education, which certainly, to my opinion, is key to the future. So with that, we end the three presentations in this session. And I think we can open the question and answer part in this session. So are there any questions from our audience to the three speakers? Dr. Nisit, can you close your presentation, Dr. Nisit?
I would have maybe a question just to go on what was just said about academic cooperation. And I think that indeed academic diplomacy is something that we could develop. So if you could elaborate a bit on this, because I think it's an interesting point for our discussion. Thank you.
If you allow, I have a question also for Farhad. Actually, you have reviewed a few solutions to the funding needs for infrastructure throughout the world, actually. But it would be interesting if you developed a little bit on institutional preconditions, because all of your solutions require a certain institutional setting without which they cannot work. And it would be interesting to, maybe not now, but to focus a little bit on to which extent these institutional preconditions are existing in Africa, and what role the European Union could play to bring about these institutional preconditions for the innovative solutions to funding of green infrastructure projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivan, for your good question. Yes, as you have clearly mentioned, in order to have, majority of these solutions, some sort of requirements are needed. And for example, I mentioned about the role of institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, and so on. However, many of them are not existing. And many of them are also existing, but their efficiency is very low. And in many developing countries, these institutions are belong to governments. They are state-owned enterprises. So we have done a project that just recently finished at Asian Development Bank Institute on reforming state-owned enterprises. That, for example, these institutions are existing but their productivity, the efficiency is very low. What kind of reforms are required regarding the governance, regarding the labor sector, regarding the allocation of resources, and so on? So from the European Union side, I think, European Union and also OECD headquarters in Paris, they have done very good works on reforming SOEs, reforming state-owned enterprises. So because I just finished a book on SOEs, I edited a book and the book is forthcoming. So when I reviewed the literature, I have seen that there is scarce of works on this area. Even for the developed countries, there is a shortage in the literature. For Africa, I'm sure that no one has done this work, reforming state-owned enterprises in Africa in order to increase their efficiency. So I think this can be a good contribution from the side of the scholars in the Europe or from Africa together.
Thank you, Fahad, for your answer. I want to return to Erwan's question that was directed to Dr. Nisset, is on elaborating on how exactly this integration of the ASEAN universities is conceived. Can you give a little bit more explanation on that, Dr. Nisset?
Yes, sir. From now, after we sign this kind of, we call the MOU and also the contract, so agreement has been made between 10 countries in ASEAN and also another 3 countries, Japan and also China and Korea. Right now, you can see this kind of students from 13 countries to transfer the credits. So for example, I have students from Thailand, study from Malaysia. So we have the exchange program. After that, the student come back and also the credit has been transferred. And there's also a benefit for me. It's like, well, you have more insightful information from Malaysia's economy. So she also can be my assistant in the ASEAN economy platform, like in class. So this kind of exchange of the student, and it's good for a youth, like a teenage student who have very powerful and power to eager to know more. And this is a good thing for, and also in my university also have students from Korea, from Japan. That is very good things that they can sit down and talk and exchange. And cultural platforms, and also discuss about the trend of the fashions and also the movie and the influence of the social media. So not only the economics, they also have other departments that can be playing part of, like myself. We have ASEAN study, just like Ghent University, sir. So this is like an example and the platform that student and also in the level of university in ASEAN, we now has been recognized and land in ASEAN+3 platform. Professor.
Maybe one short question for myself, adding to that.
Yes, sir.
In that strategy, is there a concrete plan to not have only inter-regional exchange with your Asian partners, but with international partners, Europe, for instance?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I also can create this kind of, if we can go from now, we can do that more concrete way. We also can propose this because we also have a representative of the AUN, ASEAN University Network, that that have some small requests from our platform. We're going to do some dynamic way in the university. That is a good way. Also, I talked to Professor Fahad is out of the conference about it. So Japan, also we go step by step to include like Japan in other things as well. That is like very impressive thing that I can do it. And I also can be directly report to my vice president of my university to propose that to be the academic policy of university as well. And you can count me on that. So thank you.
Excellent, brilliant. I'm having a look at if there are any other questions in the chat. Yes, I read a question. What is the role of Morocco in those EU-African partnerships, knowing the growing shift of interests of the country towards Africa? And I think, I'm not sure to whom this question is.
I can answer you.
Okay.
I can answer it if you agree. I think this is a very good question and very relevant for the overall construction of our conference. And I will take it for Morocco and for Thailand as well. I think the two countries may have parallel roles in their two respective regions. For Morocco, well, first and foremost, of course, Morocco is part of the African Union, so it can be part and parcel of negotiations of partnership and even lead it to a certain extent. Since 2017, it is again a full member of the African Union. But secondly, and most important, I would say, is the fact that Morocco has a long and deep experience in using all those partnership instruments. Since 1996, it has an association agreement with the European Union. It has, of course, a free trade area in place. It is negotiating a deep and comprehensive free trade area. It is part of the European neighborhood policy. It is the country in the southern neighborhood which has gone the farthest in terms of implementing the instruments of this European neighborhood policy, for instance, standardization, legal convergence, and it has a mobility partnership. So it has a very long and deep experience in using these instruments. And this can, of course, be a very important lever to share its experience with other African countries, to promote at the same time African, Moroccan, and European interest on the basis of the experience accumulated over these years. And I would say, of course, with different qualifications, but Thailand can play that role as well. As Nisit was mentioning, Thailand is a quite unique position within the ASEAN and the Asian context to play a kind of a hub for partnership initiatives in the region, very much as I'm arguing for Morocco. So this would be my answer.
Thank you, Ivan, for clarifying that. I have one more question that I can get from the chat. Is, will the COVID-19 pandemic accelerate the Chinese expansion of the 5G technology, and how would that impact those partnership dynamics? I don't know whom of the speakers has an insight on that.
So I can have some more information about this. Yes, China also have this kind of movement, especially 5G technologies. But the things that China are doing right now is to increase the digital technologies cooperations that try to involve in varying like we are now doing. We have Zoom, right? China also have, this is like international conference and webinar. They also include a digital technologies platform. Plus, Thailand is also have more investment from China after the pandemic occurred. It was surprised, right? So increasing in terms of, like, can I mention some of the Chinese brand like Huawei technologies? So you cannot imagine the number of the Chinese staff in Bangkok. It's like more than 1,000. 1,000. So how? They also create a platform, the skill that they also have. So the big customers come from the many, cell phone provider, because they changed the campaign to boost, and is that how fast they can do it. So the main client and customer come from the government, departments, and also the private enterprise. Academic also have a lot of we call what convinced that we also have this kind of platform that you want to try the experiment. So this is a thing that, university also having more information about the business sector outside the campus. It could be startup, could be a platform. So I think the Morocco, the scholars distinguished can get the benefit on that. Like sharing is the most important. This is my point of view. That's why I was surprised that COVID-19, the number of investment should go down, but in Thailand, the number of investment from China go up. So crisis is another opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nisit, for your answer. Are there any other questions from the audience? I cannot see in the chat. If not, let's move to the next session and try to keep a bit in the timeline. So I'll close this session here, and I offer the floor to Muhammadu, who will share the next session.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we can start. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And thank you to our colleagues here at the Policy Center for the New South, and to our partner ASEANplus Platform of the Ghent University for organizing this conference. So I think we could not find a better place and better period to discuss this issue of how to reshape the relationships between, in our global world, and mainly between three important regions, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Important for two reasons. The first reason is mainly the period we are living in, the COVID-19. The COVID-19 has shown to us something perhaps we knew before, our fragilities, our vulnerabilities, etc. But COVID-19 has accelerated it and bring it very clear to our face. The second reason of this important, why this meeting and reflection and the topic is important, is where it's taking place. It's taking place in the South. And it's important for we in the South to take the leadership and to be in a very prospective way in terms of thinking, bringing our ideas on the table, and also proposing the solutions before the things to come from the north to us. I think this meeting is important for these two reasons. This being said, triangular relationship, if we talk about triangular relationship, Asia, Africa, and Europe, this is not new, basically. It's already taking place. We have seen, we are experiencing Africa providing the raw materials, the primary goods. Asia processing it. And after, whether it's semi-final or final good, it's sent to Europe and America in the north. So this is the kind of triangular organization we are seeing now, especially in the economic, financial, and trade area, trade relationship. And the question, when I see the topic, the subject, the question we are asking is whether if this is optimal. Is it optimal? Is it viable? In other words, is it in the interest of Africa? Of course, yeah. Is it in the interest of Africa? And not only, we can ask the same question for Europe? Is it in the interest of Europe, this kind of current triangular organization, Africa producing the raw materials, Asia processing it and sending it to Europe? If the question could be no, it's not in the interest of Europe. Why? Because in economics, there is a very known citation which says basically labor follows capital. Okay, so labor always follows capital. When you have capital going in a given direction, you will immediately see labor taking the same direction. So here we have an important issue, which is the link between trade agreement, development, and migration. So this question is very important for Europe, especially in this issue of trade agreement and migration. It's not only the point of interest of Europe. We can find other interests. So the question is, all these initiatives we are seeing in Africa the CFTA. In Asia, other colleagues have talking about it, the recent trade agreement between Asian countries and some Pacific countries. And also we have the very important initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, and the question is, I think since the centuries, we have this Belt and Road Initiative. As the goods and services are circulating around the world. But the issue is what will pass through this infrastructure from Belt and Road Initiative? Will it be raw materials? Will it be processed materials? At what level? So I think what we need to know right now is what will be new in this new cooperation post-COVID, or it can be also a statu quo, but I don't think that this will be in the interest of any of the region, any region in the world. So these are the question. Perhaps some of our guests will try to answer, but it's an ongoing and perpetual reflection and thinking. To discuss this, our topic today, we have three distinguished guests. We have Professor Larabi Jaidi, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. So welcome home. We have Professor Erwan Lanon from the Faculty of Criminology and Law of the Ghent University. And also we have Professor Ponchei Wisutisak, Dean of the Faculty of Law, Chiang Mai University in Thailand. Unfortunately, he is not here with us today. So I think he sent a video. We'll watch his video and after continue to our other guest. Okay, so you can launch his video.
Good afternoon and good evening in whichever time zones. Greeting from Chiang Mai, and I sit now sitting at my office in Chiang Mai University. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Policy Center for the New South. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening in whichever time University. Greeting from Chiang Mai. It is a very important conference and workshop. Sitting at my office in Chiang Mai University. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Policy Center for the New South, and for ASEANplus under the Ghent University. It is a very important conference and workshop, but it is my apology that I cannot lively discuss the thing or the information or the discussion or making a lively discussion with you because I have a flight to fly during this afternoon. So that's why I have to record the video for the presentation. So let me start on my topic. My topic would look at the China, BRI and EU and development at the Indo-Pacific levels with the time frames that I have to be short. So I will start very brief one And then so I can discuss later in the part of about different style, different ideas between China and EU. Let me start on sharing the screen for you. Yep. So this is my outline of the outline of the brief draft paper is about we have to discuss about China Belt and Road Initiative. Then we have to understand about the China, Asia, Africa trade and investment, and then do the same with the EU, Asia, Africa trade and investment. And the fourth part, I would like to discuss what it would be an opportunity for and the challenge for the EU, China, Asia, and Africa. And the last part will be the conclusion of the paper. Let me start on the first concept of the China Belt and Road Initiative. The definition of the Belt and Road Initiative is purely from the presidency statements of China is actively promote international cooperation through the Belt and Road Initiative. In doing so, we hope to achieve policy, infrastructure, trade, financial, and people-to-people connectivity, and thus build a new platform for international cooperation to create a new driver of shared development. So it's clear that China wants to reignite a new global cooperation. And in order to make sure that, so China will have to have a strong statement providing to the other countries that, okay, from now on, I will be the countries that lead all the move forward of the global cooperation. And I say it's a new Silk Road policy which connects China and Europe, and not only China and Europe, but China, Asia, Europe, plus Africa as well. So this kind of the new move from China, but it's not new anymore because this Belt and Road Initiative has started from like almost 10 years ago. So this is the maps that I would like to show you that how China would like to connect all the world together with China. But from my perspective, China not only want to connect all the world with them or with only one country, but they said every cooperation within the frameworks, for example, Thailand and Malaysia, and maybe with China or maybe without China, China will help. So this kind of like, China will say, the more cooperation will be better for the Chinese society or for the Chinese government as well. So this is the perspective from my realization from Chinese policy on BRI. Let I move on to the China, Asia, Africa Trade and Investment Cooperation. I would like to show how China get involved in Asia and in Africa in order to invest in some various projects in Asia and China. The most of the focus is the strengthening of government-to-government multilateral trade linkage between China and the other countries. And China aims to cooperate with infrastructure development. Then they have some example. For example, is ASEAN-China Strategic Partnership, which has been adopted in 2018. And the plan will be moved forward from now on until 2030 as the closer economic and political and international cooperation between ASEAN and China. ASEAN has 10 member countries, so China and 10 other countries in ASEAN will have to working on more together. And so this is the map that China will say, okay, not only China, we include Japan and Korea as well, which is we call the ASEAN ASEP altogether, including Australia and New Zealand as well. So this is kind of like bigger picture that China wants to use the BRI to assimilate to other regions. The aim of China is that they would like to share investment and innovation to the other countries as to make the regional development. And also it's the same as the add trade service and facilitation between the region and China as well. So this is example from ASEAN and China that I present in conference in Chinese Academy of Social Science. So this is kind of exchange idea. Then if you move forward, it's CARAC corridors. CARAC is the kind of like Central Asia and China. It seems to be that China want to get involved more with the Central Asia, which is previous Soviet Union, part of Soviet Union countries. So like for example, in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, Pakistan, and Tajikistan, China invests a lot and involved with the cooperation a lot with those countries. It was my last time I went to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan with Dr. Fahad as well, under the ADBI support. It seems that China want to get involved, and there are so many projects, investment of China, state-owned enterprise, plus the private enterprise from China as well. So this is kind of like moving forward for helping the other countries. Let me move to the South Asia as well. In South Asia, China want to make sure that they can get involved with maritime linkage. So they have to build a port in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka. So this kind of policy moving forward for China to get involved and connect with the world. And also, not only that, China also moved a lot of investment from their countries into Africa. I don't have the time to list all the project to you, but to make sure that if you want to have a look, you see that there is increasing investment and loan from China to various Africa countries. You can go to have a look at China Africa Research Initiative at Johns Hopkins University. So let me move on to the EU, Asian, Africa, and trade investment. It's look the same that EU also take part in the cooperation with various countries in Asia and Africa. However, the aim is to make sure that they have sustainable development, and they have the new concept of the EU that will be involving in the Indo-Pacific. Let me move. For example, EU seems to focus more on the policy on climate change, on education, on social development, plus the investments. And also EU have the Asia-Europe meeting that allows the talk, the discussion, the meeting between Asian country with the EU countries all together. So like every year they will have the meeting. The example of EU that get involved with various countries like in Asia is, for example, in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, you see in this picture that EU invest in so many projects. For example, in Cambodia, in Philippines, in Mongolia, and even in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan. I think it looks the same with China get involved and invest and cooperate with the other countries. And this is the valid example from my region, from ASEAN, is that EU plan to have the action plan with ASEAN. And in order to do that, they would like to focus on political and security cooperation plus the economic cooperation. However, they concern small social cultural cooperation as well. So this is the example that EU get involved with some Asian countries. Not only Asia countries, the EU also get involved with Africa a lot. They have the EU summits, and they have a Africa-Europe Alliance for Sustainable Investment and Jobs. This is the example of how many billion of euro has spent to the projects in South Africa. So, however, according to my understanding, EU would invest in Asia and Africa with the purpose of to create better democracy, better human rights concern, better human rights protection, and in order to do that, I mean, EU would focus, pay attention more on education development and opportunity development. So this is kind of the, in order to do that, EU seems to consider that China has invested a lot now. EU want to get involved as well. But to get involved, they have the pop-up ideas of the new concept of the Indo-Pacific regions, which we call, for example, the words Indo-Pacific region is not purely blindly coiled up, but it's just from some countries that want to hedge against the words of BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, because they want to get involved with global connectivity, but may not happily sit within the BRI policy. So there's some countries would like to oppose or to show up some words that different from the BRI policy. And if you see Pansy, her or his research point out that China growing influence in Asia is the point leading to the Indo-Pacific words that come up. And also, if you move, according to the source, EU will likely move toward the words Indo-Pacific, and they want to make sure that they can get involved with Indo-Pacific more in order to create cooperation with the Asia and Africa and the other countries. So, however, from the all example altogether, I'm short of the time, but I will very quick. Chinese investment mostly focus on trade and investment cooperation. The BRI from China pay more attention to infrastructure development on the project to elaborate poverty and social issue in Asia and Africa. And they have less concern on social or political issue in countries. And most of the case, China will say, okay, non-intervention approach to any infrastructure project. It means that China will not concern about human rights issue. China will not concern about the democratic system or whether there will be dictatorship. As long as they can build infrastructure in order to help development, to help create development in those countries, they're happy. And China said, after the development, the country will be changed and the people in that country will be more happily on that side. However, by that helps, there is the problem with debt-ridden traps for those countries which cannot pay back infrastructure loans as well. So let me move to EU. From my research and from my perspective, EU seems to connect all methods with their trade and investment cooperation. The example is that like if EU want to build any project, they have to concern about, is there any social impact? Is there any opportunity open for the other countries, for the social, for the people in those countries or not? So it seems it's like different story between China and EU. China said, okay, I'll build infrastructure first, and then country will be developed. And EU said, okay, I will help you develop your countries, or I will help you cooperate with the other countries. But you have to make sure that you have democracy, you have human rights, then we will build infrastructure. So this is kind of a different approach. I'm not saying that China is right or EU is wrong, or EU is right or China is wrong. It depends only purely on the approach. From my work with Chinese colleagues, they will always say that if I not build infrastructure, how can I get the development results in those countries? But different from EU, EU said we will have both all together, running off together. So this is kind of different story, and it's possible that we have to bring all together. So come to my conclusion. The concern on international political and economy from China is like rising power. So it can be interpreted as a threat and can be interpreted as the new global strategic alliance, because we don't have to rely on maybe US or the other countries anymore. China will say, okay, I will be another country that can build up the development in the global market or the global cooperation. And also Asia and Africa, at this time, we cannot say that they can develop by themselves. Asia and Africa still need all assistance to the countries. So for me, if possible, I would like to see the EU, China sit all together and within Asia and Africa to fight, to bridge the world, not to fight. So it's only the choosing of to fight between EU and China, or to helping the world and to bridge the world. So the cooperative and peaceful dialogues are needed for EU and China in order to get involved with Asia and Africa. And hopefully the global sustainability can be determined by the cooperation between EU and China toward Asia and Africa. This is the end of my slide, and thank you very much for your attention. And my apology, my sincerely apology that I cannot lively talking with you. But if you need and have any question, please email me. This is my reference, and this is my
infrastructure is a strong driver for development and for political and strategic expansion. I think this point is very important. And also what I have noted from your speech is that China wants to position himself like a hub, a global hub for trade, financial flows, major economic partner. Also, at the end of your presentation, you point out very important thing, which is Europe and Asia, Europe and China are not competitors. Development is a process. Asia and Africa could be developed only with Europe, with the support of Europe. Europe is a market, is a partner. So this is an important point. I think the questions perhaps we have for you, we will ask it to our other colleagues, other panelists. So let me just give the floor to Professor Lara Jaidi, Senior Fellow at the Police Center for the New South. Bon, bienvenue, professeur. Et nous vous écoutons pour nous entretenir sur la problématique importante des zones de libre-échange, notamment la ZLECA, qui veut se positionner. Donc, quels sont les tenants et aboutissants dans cette relation entre Afrique, Asie, une relation importante, et avec l'Europe. Comment est-ce que vous voyez tout ça? On vous remercie pour votre présence.
Thank you, dear colleague Mohamedou. Thank you for Ivan and Erwan for their invitation. Allow me to present my contribution in French. It will be easier for me. Je pense qu'il y a une traduction, n'est-ce pas?
Oui.
Alors, comme vous l'avez dit, enfin, on m'a invité à disons, faire une présentation sur les questions des zones de libre-échange dans les trois régions et en même temps surtout de voir quelles sont les articulations possibles entre les zones de libre-échange dans ces trois continents. Je vais essayer d'apporter quelques éléments au débat en 3 moments ou 4 moments. Enfin, le premier étant de peut-être donner un panorama assez rapide de l'état des accords de libre-échange dans les 3 continents, en essayant de nous poser la question sur leur lien éventuel pour le futur. Et dans un deuxième temps, enfin, je vais essayer de voir quelles sont la question clé qui m'interpelle enfin, dans cette analyse de ce panorama. Est-ce qu'on n'est pas en train d'évoluer vers une forme de multilatéralisation des accords de libre-échange? Et je m'expliquerai sur cette question de multilatéralisation des accords de libre-échange dans les différentes régions. En partant évidemment enfin, d'un diagnostic aussi sur les points communs et les divergences des accords de libre-échange dans les trois régions. Et je terminerai mon intervention sur 5 ou 6 questions clés qui me paraissent peut-être mériter discussion. Mais tout d'abord, vous serez d'accord avec moi, vous conviendrez avec moi que dans le monde d'aujourd'hui, qui est un monde en crise, tout le monde, tous les observateurs, tous les analystes, tous les décideurs aussi, se posent cette question sur
asking this question on the future of the world trade. Would it be multilateral? Would it be regional? Would it be bilateral? It is true that the question is not to decide for one or another of these options, but showcase rather that the world and regional trade will, of course, respond to these three motions and movements in a way. But the interest is that the three regions that we are observing today need to get some attention in terms of evolution. So the free trade agreements, both in Africa, Asia, and Europe, is characterized by its density. As you know, the world multilateral trade system has come up with 305 regional trade agreements or free trade agreements. In these 305 free trade agreements that are operating, because the ones that have been notified are more important according to the WTO, because there are agreements of services, other agreements that haven't been enforced yet. But out of the 305 agreements, the three regions, Asia has concluded or signed over 100 agreements. Europe has signed over 20 free trade agreements. I'm not talking about domestic markets. I'm talking about Europe in its relationship with the rest of the world, over 20 free trade agreements signed by Europe with the rest of the world. And Africa is right now signing internally and domestically and putting in place free trade agreements processes. So out of the 305 agreements, almost half or 2/3 of the free trade agreements are focused on these three regions that we are discussing today. This being said, beyond the very density, what should be noted is the multi-directions of these agreements. It can be bilateral agreements, but it could also be regional agreements. And more importantly, both South-South and North-South agreements. As a matter of fact, multi-direction agreements, which really leads us to ask some questions in terms of consistency between all these agreements and rules that really govern the implementation and enforcement of these free trade agreements. So in these three regions, we tend to go and move towards mega projects of free trade agreements, both in Asia and Europe. Europe opened as an open gate to the Pacific or transatlantic exchanges and trade, and Africa has also put in place a mega project through the African Free Continental Agreements. Even that only 30 countries have really ratified these countries, but there are other free trade agreements within the regional economic communities. Some are unequal compared to others, but there is a growing trend to move towards three-party triangular agreements. So Africa is really paving the way towards this opening dimension and dynamics, and is gaining momentum in terms of opening internally and internationally, because Africa has different level type of agreements with the EU, because the EU has signed enlarged or deepened free trade agreements with some Northern African countries, with new activities, with shared standards in terms of industry, agriculture, and other sectors. And you have, on the other hand, what we call the partnerships, the traditional partnerships that Ivan was referring to earlier on, that are in a deadlock and trying to reinvent or re-engineer to gain a new momentum. And I will add to that that Europe is also now negotiating new trade agreements within the continent, namely with the Pacific and Caribbean. So Africa is embraced in this whole dimension. But we're looking for the research of mega projects. As I was saying earlier on, over 107 free trade agreements that are enforced in Europe, and agreements that are not only bilateral, by the way, but they are multilateral agreements. The first one is the one that has been negotiated in the 70s or 1975, that has become the Asian Pacific Trade Agreement. And the most recent one, or the emblematic one, is the ASEAN Pacific Agreement. And the most recent one is the one that was signed last week with China and has given a new momentum, a new dynamics way beyond the Asian continent, but towards the Pacific Ocean. So this dynamics is very interesting, but it's characterized by these mega projects. And the palm is in Asia. Why Asia? Why this multiplication of free trade agreements? Does it coincide or does it really merge with the difficulties facing the multilateralism process? But it really stems from the power conflicts and power divergences, and China that has become the driving force of a world free trade agreement process, 3 bilateral agreements and agreements that it's promoting in Asia. And this is why the trade agreements within Asia are kind of following the trend that is being witnessed by the EU markets, which is another component of this European integration process that is actually trying to find a way out in the framework of the enlargement of the EU, because the EU is seeking to enlarge its border to new member states and consolidate, on the other hand, free trade agreements that it has signed with the rest of the world. And this is why the question that really struck my mind when I was thinking about this discussion, aren't we really heading towards a progressive and gradual multilateralization of free trade agreements? And if we are doing so, what would be the situation of Africa in the framework of this new configuration? Why multilateralization? Well, because both in Asia, Africa, and in Europe, we can see that free trade agreements that have kind of been signed are giving us the image of spaghetti balls. These are free trade agreements, in other words, that have become very complicated in the global relationships, in their relations and interconnections. And these agreements that are incomplete or unfinished because there are sectors like agriculture and services that haven't been covered by these free trade agreements. These are free trade agreements that have been facing some challenges in terms of implementation, namely in terms of trade facilitation or non-tariff barriers or implementation of rules of origin, because let's not overlook the fact that we are in a very complex situation, not only in terms of weaving our relationships, but before the weaving of these relationships and forging of these relationships, there are issues in terms of implementation, and really poses a problem of difficulty and complication in the enforcement phase. And this is why we're witnessing new generation agreements producing issues in terms of intellectual property rights, and it has become vital in the implementation of free trade agreements. The issue of competition has become core in the new generation of these free trade agreements. The e-commerce agreements, in other words, that go beyond the simple tariff facilitation and liberalization, but really lead us to reflect on the common order of partner countries.
And this is why, in this dimension and in this multilateralization that is taking place, well, we can ask the question on the consolidation of these agreements, and that will turn into intra-regional and even inter-regional agreements, whereas where we saw the case of the Asia Pacific region. And Asia in this consolidation has a certain leg up compared with Africa or Europe, in the sense that in Asia, what prevails is an open regionalization approach, where we don't necessarily put in place free trade agreements with the rest of the world, but even in the free trade agreements that exist, bilaterally or plurilateral agreements, there's this form of open regionalization that stays open onto near neighboring countries that are not necessarily part of these agreements as far as free trade goes. And the majority of these free trade agreements that are entered into in Asia are interregional bilateral agreements that span over to other regions of the world. And this is the specific characteristic. And so this connectivity is no longer encapsulated within a region or within a continent, but it will sprawl outwards. So what are the common points between these free trade agreements, not only in Asia, but also in Europe? Well, it's obviously very difficult to analyze this in a nutshell, but we can identify some common points between these free trade agreements in Europe, Africa, and Asia. They are all preferential. This is the first rule. This means that they don't extend these advantages to other stakeholders. These are also agreements that have rules of origin, but that require sufficient content to gain access to these rights of these trade rights. And it is also fundamental because it is they must also reference WTO agreements. Almost all free trade agreements are backed by rules and standards of the WTO, and these are agreements where the rights and obligations of the parties under the WTO remain unchanged to a certain extent. So, are these agreements advantageous for the stakeholders? And the economic theory, as you all know, well, the creation of trade, diversion of trade, etc. This is all great, but in this surplus of trade that is created within the zone, well, how is it distributed, and how fair is its distribution? And the interest of the advantage of these free trade agreements is to head towards convergence and not towards divergence. So, which begs the question of the evaluation of these agreements in terms of convergence or divergence. And if we were to review the resolution of disputes within the WTO, there are a lot of dispute resolutions that pertain to free trade agreements because certain parties denounce them, or otherwise they request an arbitration because the fairness of the trade is not necessarily favorable, because the standards for the implementation are not clear enough in the text that relate to these free trade agreements. So it's dumping, anti-dumping, safeguarding, etc. So are they advantageous? Yes, most certainly, but the question is to see how we can ensure this fairness in the distribution of the added value of these free trade agreements, which leads us to the question on whether we will continue to see these regional free trade agreements in the future, or whether multilateral agreements which will prevail. And this is definitely an interesting question to address, because we are in interesting times, and global trade have varying dynamics, and globalization is here to stay, and it needs a certain number of agreements that aren't necessarily agreements between countries, but that are agreements among sectors. For example, e-commerce, agriculture, services, and so on and so forth. And consequently, the multilateral dimension remains present unless the agreements, the free trade agreements, these regional and transregional free trade agreements take ownership of these sectoral issues and integrate them in their agreements, aside from leaving aside the dismantlement of tariff barriers. And today, if we were to take stock of global trade, 98% of global trade is multilateral. And from these 98%, excuse me, well, 52% of this trade are free of customs duties, and 28% are under the NPF rule. So consequently, the dimension of free trade is relatively reduced. It only stands at about 20%. These free trade agreements show that there are relations, there's some overlapping, some multilateral overlapping that also occurs, and which requires, as I mentioned earlier, the definition of preferential rules of origin, which requires provisions relating to the mutual recognition and self-certification, which also requires a certain number of rules and standards that are very difficult to note. Many agreements, many free trade agreements, both in Africa, Asia, and Europe, fail to give a rise to an important dimension to services in these agreements. And so the question of safeguarding relating to services are also limited. There's also the question of e-commerce that is not introduced. Also a certain number of IT that's also not part of these agreements. So this leaves some room for multilateralism to express its capabilities to address all of these issues. On this basis, what are the issues that are raised by this landscape and this analysis of these free trade agreements as far as their strengths and weaknesses? Or I will rapidly mention 6 issues today. The first issue that we can raise once we take a look at the triangulation of these trade relations between Africa, Europe, and Asia, well, one of the issues is, what about the global value chains? Can regional cooperation, can multinational cooperation, will it change because we are embarking in a new wave, a new era of what we can call global value chains? And this is both for technological reasons or proximity reasons, transactional costs, sovereignty, etc. So there are some shifts that are announced as far as the deployment of value chains that are more in favor, that tend more to favor proximity than globalization. So the tension between regional and global value chains will intensify, and it will be interesting to see what the linkages that will happen between these the supply chains and free trade agreements. So this is a first point which I think deserves being addressed. And so the second issue I'd like to raise is, what about the response to the current pandemic by a global or regional management of the effects or the implications of the pandemic? The pandemic is only showcasing the necessity to find either regional or global solutions, or regional and global solutions, because the health crisis is public and is also could be a food crisis in the future. It requires a coordination, and so we are turning towards a trend where exiting this pandemic will require us to coordinate between trade policy, intellectual property policies, and health policies. This is what the post-COVID era requires, and maybe this synergy between intellectual property for pharmaceutical products and whatnot will define a new, will lead to the creation of a new profile, and it will be easier to have this regional dimension that might prevail over the multilateral one. And the final point, another point, the third point regarding Africa. So in this triangular dynamic, what is the relationship with China or Europe, or with China and Europe? Because what's at stake today is global leadership in global trade. And it is this global leadership, and so the role of the United States is just as fundamental. However, the rise of China and the affirmation or the desire of Europe to consolidate its position will put Africa in a position to see how they can find the complementarity, how Africa can find the complementarities, and doing that is adopting a position on the tension point that might exist between these three powers, global powers. And Europe is obviously happens to be in between, is stuck in the middle, in between the U.S. and China. So there's also an issue of values, and also the tension that the Belt and Road Initiative is creating in Europe through the privileged relationship between Central Europe and China. So there's a sort of tension between China and Europe, which is obviously which also has an impact on Africa and its relationship with both of these powers. And so is it advantageous for these three entities, so Europe, Asia, and Africa, to head towards a mega free trade or a super mega free trade agreement, meaning that this would imply a negotiation of an openness between these three continents or three entities as far as free trade goes. So in this debate, we might wonder about proximity, which is always the best way to ensure the efficiency and effectiveness of trade. And so the more we head towards multilateralism, well, these advantages are wider. So in addition to these mega free trade agreements, it's not only an issue of access to markets or customs duties, but it is all of the new themes: intellectual property, e-commerce. It's also the convergence of these three major regions around a shared vision. This is which begs the fifth question or issue before concluding with the sixth one: is how can we ensure the convergence of the common interests of these three entities in the future multilateral negotiations? So how can we ensure the convergence of the common interests of these three entities towards future negotiations? It is true the future negotiations have yet to be announced. The WTO is in crisis. So if it is in crisis, well, possibly the plurilateral approach might impose itself. And so it impacts agriculture, e-commerce, or fishery sector. So shouldn't we head towards the convergence of a common interest around a plurilateral vision, but that would lead to a common vision and common standards around these three entities? And finally, and which this is the last issue, which marks the end of my presentation. So these free trade agreements are only one aspect of the regionalization of these regions. So let's recall that in each of these regions there are some political dialogue bodies, and so for the promotion of safety and security. So the question is to see how can we continue to engage in this dialogue with and to converge this with the political and security dialogues. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Jaidi, for this extremely rich landscape. There is quite a lot of information and lessons learned and questions that were raised, and especially regarding the future. And how these free trade agreements should look like in the future. So I am told that we are pressed for time. I personally have quite a few questions to ask and comments regarding your presentation, so maybe we can get back to those later. Now, let's, without further ado,
panelist, Professor Erwan Lennon from the Faculty of Criminology and Law of the Ghent University. I think you will develop more regarding the issue of triangular relationship between Europe, Africa, and Asia. So, Professor Lennon, you're welcome.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup. Vous m'entendez bien?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for your... I will be as brief as possible. I will be as brief as possible, and I'm going to speak in English.
Just do a short introduction on maritime routes and not insist so much. This is the challenge when you're the last to speak. Much has been said already. And then I will have 3 points. The first one is on defining the actors of the triangle, Europe, Africa, Asia. The second point is a question, in fact, is there a need for a new EU strategy or not? We discussed a bit the instrument notably. Third point, identifying clear objectives and common sectoral priorities. We have already a number of elements in this regard, and a short conclusion. So, as it was mentioned already, this triangular relationship, Europe, Africa, Asia, is very ancient. So I'm not going to come back to those very ancient, this very ancient dimension, even if I have plenty of documentation next to me about that. But I want to show you the map that I have behind me. This is in fact a map that I found on the flea market in Brussels. And this is about the Mediterranean Sea. And if you have a look to the map, you will see that Asia is mentioned in the east. You have Africa as well, but there is no Europe. You have Ottoman Empire, Austria, and the reason why is that it's not an official map. It was apparently a map that was created by a maritime shipping company. And if you take magnifying glasses, you will see that there are different routes. In fact, it's coming and going to Marseille. And the maritime routes going to Asia are either via the Gibraltar Strait, which is quite interesting, or via Alexandria, because at that time, when the map was drawn, there was no Suez Canal. And this is really to be underlined because this Suez Canal was open for navigation in 1869 only. So it's just to remember that has been mentioned by several speakers that globalization is linked to maritime routes and containerization. And that means that the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific have to be taken into consideration. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why that came very often in our conversation. So this would be really very preliminary reflections on this Europe, Africa, Asia potential triangle relationships. I started first to work on the FTAs, and then when I saw that our friend Lahabi Jaidi was going to tackle this, I switched more to strategies. And in this reflection, my first point is defining the actors of the triangle, because let me be a bit provocative. I think we have to challenge existing perceptions and break geographical silos, but what is Europe? Europe is not necessarily the EU, and today the EU is the EU minus the United Kingdom, and that we have to underline. Also very important, I think, is to consider the EFTA countries, so European Free Trade Association, and the EEA countries, the European Economic Area, because they do have also free trade areas, including with countries like Philippines, to give an idea. Let's not forget the Balkans, who have also sometimes a Mediterranean dimension, or Russia and Turkey, that are European, but also Asian. We are in Eurasia, and recently we saw Turkey and Russia being very active in Eurasia, in the Southern Caucasus. So I think we have to take that into consideration. Europe is difficult to define, to delimit, and there are important divergences between European actors and among them. But the latter is, of course, also true for Africa or Asia. What was mentioned by Ivan is also very important. I think it's the perception of the EU and the EEC vis-à-vis Africa. For many years, as you know, the African continent was quite artificially divided by the EU between the northern part of the African continent, so the Mediterranean policy that became the European neighborhood policy, and the sub-Saharan dimension that is close to the ACP framework. So now there is a continental approach, a strategic partnership, and I think that in our reflection, the key element is that we have an institutional interlocutor, that is the African Union. And this is, I think, good news and very important on top of what we will see in the post-Cotonou framework. Defining Asia from a Eurocentric perspective is also even, I would say, more difficult. Because the EU approach is still very fragmented. Our friend Ponchai mentioned the fact that we have the ASEAN, that is the more so the Asia-Europe meetings, that is the broader dialogue, and it includes also pan-European approach. But this is the advantage and also the disadvantage. It might be too broad. So, and again, it's just a framework as such, whereas we are still looking for an EU-Asian strategic partnership that is, to my opinion, of utmost importance and strategic importance. And I think that we can be creative at legal level at that. At this for this EU-Asian strategic partnership. So the preliminary conclusion is that it's not easy to identify the actors, that there is a proliferation of actors, and that we have to be very clear about that. But EU, EFTA, EEA, African Union, ASEM, and ASEAN have obviously to be taken into consideration. We need flexibility, but we need visibility also. So the second point, is there a need for an EU and a new EU strategy? This is another pressing question. Josep Borrell, that I mentioned in my introduction in his reaction to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, said that, and I quote, Europeans should be proactive in the Indo-Pacific. But what does it mean? Should that take the form of a new strategy, a kind of EU Indo-Pacific strategy? What kind of value added could bring such a strategy? And also, how is this strategy going to be perceived in the region? Again, Indo means also India, and this is very important. And one can see the debate evolving nowadays, and that has been mentioned several times. 3 years ago, I worked with some colleagues on the possibility to establish an EU-Indian ocean strategy. So for those who are interested, it was published in French, l'Union européenne, modèle de puissance ou puissance mondiale dans l'océan Indien, sous la direction de Didier Blanc et Julie Dupont-Lassalle. And at that moment of time, I put forward three proposals, three options. The first one was not to create any new framework, but to build on the existing ones. The second one was to envisage only a maritime strategy in the Indian Ocean, because we have other cases, and this is a possibility. And the third option was to create a fully fledged strategy in the Indian Ocean for the EU. So in other words, there are different options available and on the table, but before designing these new frameworks, I think it's fundamental to identify the actors. So this is really something we have to do. Engage in a dialogue, and this is what we do today, to share perceptions about projects and initiatives, but also identify clear general objectives and common sectoral priorities. And in this respect, I think that this was very clear in the last presentation. We need to address in the most effective manner the socio-economic impacts of the crisis. And this should become one of our major common objectives. Poverty reduction is already an important priority, but it will become a major priority in the years to come. So social economic impacts of the crisis are and will be unprecedented and considerable. This is obvious at structural level, thus our emphasis on infrastructure, value chains, but also migratory flows that were mentioned. So this is absolutely key to take into consideration, and we had, I think, very good presentations on financial and investment flows. In terms of sectors, I think that the green and digital transitions and their governance are strategic. It's also about climate change. It's also about energy, and here, what is obvious is this transnational dimension. So we should look for convergence in these areas because this is of utmost importance. I'm thinking also about ocean governance. This is something that is coming back and back in the EU discourse, like security of maritime routes. So this is why I started with that. Safety of critical supply chain. I think that the blue economy is something that could be of interest. And this is currently developed in the Mediterranean and could be and will be, I'm sure, developed also in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific, if it is not already the case. Environmental cooperation at large is something that we need to take into consideration, like promoting regional cooperation, that is really in the DNA of the EU. And we had also many points on education, that is absolutely key, and also academic cooperation, or even we mentioned academic diplomacy. And I think that those issues are very important. There are many others, but I think that we have a certain convergence on those questions. So by way of conclusion, again, to be very brief, as it was mentioned, in every crisis, there are opportunities. And this is very important not to miss those opportunities because time is running. I think also that one of the keys for the success is to be as inclusive as possible. So especially at the start of the project. Europeans need to design longer term strategy because this is one of the weaknesses that we have at the level of the EU. Diversification, and I'm referring to trade, but other elements also, diversification will be extremely important for each partner. Also, as a lawyer, I like EU's emphasis on the rule-based order, notably at the level of the Euro-Asian connectivity that must be sustainable, comprehensive, and rule-based. But this should be further analyzed. We had 2-3 interventions that do refer to conditionality. Bruno Jetin, for example, also referred to the palm tree oil, that is a major preoccupation in the Asian. There are many issues to be taken into consideration at that level. And again, these opportunities should not be missed, because if divergence prevails over convergence, it could become really dangerous. And I think that it is very important that partners like the EU, the African Union, and the Asian work more together and diversify their relations, exchange and share ideas and perceptions. And I think that this is what we try to do today. So I would like really to thank all the participants for sharing the ideas, and I think that we are on very good track. So I'm going to stop here, Mr. Chairman, so that we can have a few questions, because we are really running out of time. But this is a sign also of a very rich debate, I have to say. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Lannon, for your very interesting insight. So one expression perhaps to resume all you said would be perhaps you proposing a new logical framework for European Union, new strategic cooperation, new framework where we will need first to define the actors, okay? Who is, or what is Europe? First question. What is Africa? And you gave a very interesting answer, because we used to have the kind of Frederick Hegel definition of Africa, where we have North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. The two regions are very different. and we have the desert between them. So now we see that it's good news that Africa is being considered as one very coherent continent with one actor, etc. And this is a very point for going forward. The second is Europe. We need to know who is Europe, who is in Europe, and where does it stop, and where does it start, and where does it stop. So this is the first thing of your logical framework. And second is to define the objectives. Okay, Africa has its own objectives in terms of development. It's not a matter of just selling raw materials like we used to do. Yes, we want to integrate in the global value chain, but things has not to be like it was. We want things to change. So this, I think in your logical framework, we will have objectives from all the different three regions. And the third thing would be flexibility and visibility. Okay, things should be clear for all the actors. And then you mentioned the key sectors. I will just keep two things, which is I think very important, the safety of critical supply chains. I think with the COVID, this issue has arisen, safety of critical supply chain. I will link it with what you said at the end, is promoting European Union, promoting regional integration. So these are the key point. I think we can. I have a question on this, which is, before I go back to Mr. Larabi Jaidi, which is, I wanted to ask you, as you in Europe, regional integration in Africa. How do you see it? Is it a threat for European Union influence in the continent, or is it an opportunity? So this, I think, needs to be clear. So if you can just perhaps answer to give if you have an answer very quickly.
Indeed. I refer to that because I think that the EU can help in this regard, and the regional trade agreements were really a tool to promote regional integration. In the case of Africa, the economic partnership agreements that were created, for example, one of the issues, but maybe our friend can continue on this, was that to a certain extent, certain regions were quite artificial. And this is something that came back and back. So I think that we have to think about that also with the actors in Africa. This is something I saw when I was studying those EPAs. You know, what is the reality of this region? Or even if you take West Africa, for example, you have different integration. You don't have only the ECOWAS. You have also the UEMOA and the CEDEAO together. So you have also overlappings, and it has been always very difficult to define regions and sub-regions. So this is the reason why I said it's really good that we have finally a continental strategic approach, because this is clearer in this respect. So in Asia, it's a bit different, because the ASEAN has already a history, and here again, the EU promoted regional integration. It's also true in Latin America for the Andean Pact, or if you have a look to the Mercosur, how they took into consideration the European integration process to a certain extent. But it's more in terms of sharing experience. You see, there are two ways. There is cooperation, there is sharing experience, and there is the more trade dimension that might be a bit different. And that might not necessarily coincide with the interest of everyone. So I think it's a very good question. It's difficult to answer in 5 minutes, but those are my perception. Again, the main danger is to be careful not to create, that was my message for the new strategy, an empty shell, so a framework that is not going to be used, or artificial regions just designed for trade purposes. I think we should go beyond this, and first of all, dialogue with our partners. This is the most important.
Thank you very much, Professor Lennon. Professor Jaidi, just une question.
Professor Jaidi, I have a quick question to ask you. I'm being told that our time is up. This is concerning the various free trade agreements. Mainly, we saw the less advanced countries to whom we grant certain facilities. We also have other the post-Cotonou countries. And so the question that I'd like to ask, and it relates to global value chains. Do these agreements contain the necessary incentives to ensure that the developing countries, the African countries in particular, can also gain some momentum from these agreements? I mean, we can all speak of the merits of these free trade agreements, but since for the past 60 years, we're talking about cocoa, coffee, and other commodities that are part of these free trade agreements. So the idea is to see whether these free trade agreements can really have an impact on the structural economies of these developing countries. Could you please unmute yourself, sir? So potentially, yes, but it all depends on the supporting policies. Free trade agreements in and of themselves can allow us to have this broadened trading space. And if there is an offer that is relatively limited, well, you cannot leverage all of the opportunities that come along with it. So these free trade is meant to be conducive to a single market, which operates on the basis of common rules, but it is a market that is also constructed by investment. It doesn't only rely upon removing tariff barriers, but it's also developing common policies. If Africa cannot implement common policies, common industrial or agricultural policies that are the true guarantors to head towards regional value chains that are conducive, will allow Africa to improve its position in regional and global value chains. And so this is the purpose of a free trade agreement. It's not only the creation of a space, but the creation of investment opportunities and opportunities for common policies as well. Could you kindly unmute yourself, sir? So I was saying that I would like to thank everyone. I would like to thank the organizers at the Policy Center for the New South, Mr. Ivan, that kindly handed over the moderator's role to me. I'd like to thank Mr. Jaidi, Mr. Lennon, as well as all those that have spoken before. We are eager to read your papers, and so I'd like to thank everyone for your participation and kind attention. So good day, good evening, depending on which time zone you are in. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Good day.
Merci à tous. Merci à la technique et à la traduction des interprètes.